There are places that remain long after they should have disappeared. Not because they are remembered, but because something in them refuses to be forgotten. Hollow Ridge was not a town people spoke about. It wasn't the kind of place that appeared in stories or travel routes, or even old photographs passed down through families. It existed in absence, in the spaces where memory failed and records stopped. If someone asked about it directly, most people would hesitate, not because they didn't know, but because the answer felt uncertain, like trying to describe a dream that fades while you're still speaking. The strange thing was not that Hollow Ridge disappeared. The strange thing was that, for some people, it came back, not physically, not completely, but in fragments, a flicker of light where none should exist, a road that seemed longer than it used to be, a signal that didn't belong to any known source, and sometimes a message, short, untraceable, impossible to ignore. It started again. Prologue. The first signal. The night was colder than expected. Not the kind of cold that settled naturally with the season, but something sharper, more precise, as if the air itself had been altered. Inside his home, Daniel Ellison sat alone at a wooden table that had not been moved in years. The radio in front of him hummed with static. He had been listening for hours, not idly, not out of habit, but with intent. Every fluctuation in the noise meant something to him now. Every break in the pattern carried the possibility of structure. Most people would have turned it off. Daniel leaned closer. The static shifted, not randomly, not naturally. There was repetition, subtle, hidden, but undeniably present. Daniel adjusted the dial slowly. The signal sharpened. For a moment, it almost resembled language. Then it changed again, faster now, more organized, like something adapting, learning. Daniel's breath slowed. "It's not interference," Daniel Ellison said quietly. The room responded with silence. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., every light in the house turned on, simultaneously. No delay, no fluctuation, just on. Daniel didn't move. He didn't need to. He had been expecting something, just not this. The radio sound deepened. Not louder, deeper, like the signal had shifted dimensions rather than volume. For 11 seconds, something spoke, not in words, not in sound alone, but in pattern. And Daniel understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was not a broadcast. It was an invitation. Chapter 1. Where the Road Ends. The road into Hollow Ridge did not announce itself. There was no sign, no marker, no indication that anything lay ahead beyond what could already be seen. Dry trees, uneven asphalt, and a horizon that seemed to recede the longer you looked at it. Mara Ellison almost missed the turn. Her GPS had already failed 10 minutes earlier, the screen freezing briefly before going completely blank. She had tried restarting it once, then again, before giving up entirely. Now the phone sat face down in the passenger seat. Useless. She didn't need it anyway. Not really. The road was still familiar. That was the problem. Mara slowed the car as the tires shifted from smooth highway to cracked pavement. The sound changed immediately. A low, uneven rhythm. Predictable. Uncomfortable. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. "It's just a road," Mara said quietly. The words felt thin. The kind of reassurance that doesn't convince anyone, not even the person saying it. The trees thickened as she drove further, not dramatically, but enough to change the light. Shadows stretched across the road in long, uneven lines, shifting slightly as the wind moved through the branches above. Except there wasn't much wind. Mara noticed that after a while. The trees moved, but the air felt still. She frowned. "That's Strange. The radio crackled. Mara glanced at it instinctively. Static filled the car, dry, uneven, broken by occasional sharp bursts that sounded almost like clipped syllables. She reached forward and turned the dial. Nothing changed. The same static, the same interruptions. Then, a voice. "Don't come back." Mara's hand froze mid-motion. The sound cut instantly. The radio returned to static as if nothing had happened. Mara didn't move for several seconds. Then, "That wasn't real," Mara said. Her voice was steady. Too steady. She turned the radio off. Silence filled the car. It felt heavier than the noise had. The first streetlight appeared without warning. Mara almost drove past it before noticing. It stood slightly crooked at the edge of the road, its metal surface dulled by time. The bulb flickered weakly, casting an inconsistent circle of yellow light onto the pavement below. Mara slowed the car. That shouldn't be on. Hollow Ridge hadn't had working power lines in years. At least, that's what she remembered. The second street light appeared further ahead, flickering, then the third, then the fourth. Mara's foot eased off the accelerator. By the time she reached the sixth, she had slowed to a crawl. All 6 lights flickered. Not randomly, not independently. Together, on, off, perfectly synchronized. Mara stared at them. That's not possible. The timing was too precise, too controlled. It didn't feel like malfunction. It felt like intention. Her phone buzzed. The sound cut through the silence sharply. Mara flinched slightly before reaching for it. "No signal," she said automatically, turning the screen toward her. The display lit up anyway. A message. No sender, no number. Just 3 words. It started again. Mara's breath slowed. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't open anything. There was nothing to open. Just the message. Static in textual form. But the meaning, that was clear. Too clear. Mara leaned back slightly in her seat. Her eyes drifted toward the road ahead. The town was beginning to take shape in the distance. Faint. Incomplete. Like something still deciding whether to be seen. "Dad," Mara whispered. The word came without thought, without intention, and once it was said, it didn't feel like a question. The car rolled forward slowly. The street lights behind her continued their steady pulse. Ahead, Hollow Ridge waited. Not abandoned, not alive, but something in between. Mara tightened her grip on the wheel. "I'm not staying," Mara said quietly. The words sounded final, decisive, certain, but something in the air shifted as she spoke. Subtle, almost imperceptible, as if the town itself had heard her and disagreed. Chapter 2. The House That Waited. The house stood exactly where it always had. That should have made it familiar. It didn't. Mara Ellison parked the car a few feet from the front steps, but didn't get out immediately. The engine idled beneath her, a low, steady vibration that felt reassuring in a way she hadn't expected. She kept her hands on the steering wheel, still, waiting, as if stepping out of the car would make something irreversible happen. The house watched. That was the thought that settled into her mind without permission. Not because it moved, not because anything about it was visibly alive, but because it felt aware. The porch sagged slightly to the left, just as it had years ago. The railing was missing 2 slats. The windows were boarded unevenly, leaving narrow gaps where darkness pressed outward instead of inward. Mara exhaled slowly. "It's just a house," Mara said. The words landed softly, unconvincing. She turned off the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. No distant traffic, no insects, no wind. Just nothing. Mara opened the car door. The sound seemed louder than it should have been, echoing briefly before fading into the stillness. Her boots touched the ground. Gravel shifted beneath her weight. That sound, at least, felt normal. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment, looking at the house, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The walk to the porch felt longer than it should have. Each step deliberate, measured, as if the ground itself resisted being crossed. Mara reached the first step and paused. Her eyes moved across the front of the house slowly, taking in every detail. The peeling paint, the warped wood, the boards nailed across the windows. One of them was slightly loose. That hadn't been there before. Mara frowned. Someone's been here. The thought came quietly, carefully, as if saying it too loudly might make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. She stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath her. Familiar. That part hadn't changed. The second step gave a little more than the first, just like it used to. Mara almost smiled. Almost. The front door stood closed, unbroken, unforced. She reached out and placed her hand against it. The wood felt cold, colder than the air. Mara hesitated, then pushed. The door resisted at first, sticking in the frame, just like it always had. Mara pushed harder. It gave way with a long, low groan that echoed through the house beyond. The sound didn't fade immediately. It lingered, as if the space inside had depth that shouldn't have been there. Mara stepped inside. The air changed instantly, cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. She stopped just past the doorway, letting her eyes adjust, letting the silence settle around her. I'm not staying, Mara said quietly. Her voice sounded different here, muted, absorbed, as if the walls were taking it in rather than reflecting it back. The living room came into focus slowly, furniture covered in sheets, a table pushed slightly off-center, a broken lamp in the corner, everything exactly where it had been, except for the floor. Mara froze. It took her a second to understand what she was seeing, then another, and then... Her breath slowed. The floorboards in the center of the room had been removed. Not damaged, not rotted. Removed, cleanly, deliberately. No, Mara whispered. She stepped closer, each movement careful, measured, as if the space itself had become unstable. The missing section revealed something beneath. Not dirt, not beams, concrete, smooth, flat, intentional, and carved into it, lines. Mara crouched slowly. Her eyes traced the shapes, intersecting paths, curves that looped into themselves, angles that didn't make sense at first glance, but seemed to align the longer she looked. This isn't random. The words came automatically, because it wasn't. There was structure here, design, purpose. At the center of the carving, a symbol, a circle, split perfectly in half, one side filled, the other empty. Mara's hand hovered above it, not touching, not yet. Her pulse slowed, then quickened, then steadied again. I've seen this. The memory didn't come gently. It arrived all at once. Daniel Ellison kneeling on the floor, the same space, but intact, whole. He held a tool in his hand, sharp, precise, and carved into the wood with focused intensity. It has to match, Daniel Ellison said. His voice was calm, too calm. Match what? Mara had asked. She was younger then, small enough that the room felt larger, simpler. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His hand paused mid-motion. Then he turned, and when he looked at her, something was different. Not fear, not exactly. Certainty, the kind that leaves no room for doubt. "The signal," Daniel Ellison said. "Back in the present." Mara pulled her hand away sharply. Her breath caught. That didn't." She stood quickly, stepping back, putting distance between herself and the carving. The room felt different now, not just quiet, occupied. Mara turned slowly, scanning the space, the furniture, the walls, the covered shapes that hadn't moved in over a decade. Everything still, everything silent. Then, a sound, soft, subtle, but unmistakable. A creak from deeper in the house. Mara froze. Her body reacted before her mind did. Muscles tightening, breath held, listening. "Hello?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. No answer. The silence stretched, long enough to become something else. Not absence, expectation. Then, another sound. A metallic clang, faint, distant, but deliberate. Mara's eyes shifted back to the floor, to the opening, to the concrete, to the pattern. "That's not just a carving." Her voice dropped. "It's a marker." The realization settled slowly, heavily. This wasn't something her father had built. It wasn't something someone had added later. It was an entrance. Mara took a step closer, then another, drawn again. Despite herself, the air near the opening felt colder. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. Enough to matter. She crouched again, closer this time. Her hand moved forward. And this time, it touched the concrete. The reaction was immediate. Not from the floor, from her. A sharp pulse ran through her fingers, up her arm. Not pain, not exactly, but something unfamiliar. Something recognized. Mara pulled her hand back. Her breath quickened. What was that? The house didn't answer. But beneath her, something shifted. Not physically, not visibly, but undeniably. A low hum. So faint it was almost imagined. Almost. Mara leaned closer, listening. The hum deepened slightly. Not louder, but clearer, structured. Like the radio signal. Mara's eyes widened. No. The realization came slowly, reluctantly. It's still running. The hum responded. Not randomly. In rhythm. The same rhythm as the streetlights. On, off, on, off. Mara stood abruptly, stepping back again. "This wasn't the beginning," Mara said, her voice steadier now, more certain. She looked at the carving, at the symbol, at the opening beneath her feet. This was never the beginning. Her gaze lifted toward the hallway, toward the deeper parts of the house, toward the place the sound had come from. It's already active. The hum continued, steady, uninterrupted, and somewhere beneath Hollow Ridge, something listened. Chapter 3. The Diner Light. The town looked smaller at night, not physically, but emotionally. Like time had been slowly pressing inward on it for years, shrinking it into something quieter, stranger, less certain of its own existence. Mara Ellison drove slowly through the empty streets, headlights cutting across abandoned storefronts and broken windows that reflected light without warmth. Nothing moved, no people, no cars, not even animals. The silence had deepened since entering the house. It no longer felt natural. It felt controlled. The streetlights continued their strange synchronized pulse overhead. On, off, steady, intentional. Mara noticed herself matching her breathing to the rhythm without meaning to. When she realized it, she forced herself to stop. "That's not normal." Her voice sounded too loud inside the car. She passed the old pharmacy first, boarded shut, then the hardware store, collapsed inward slightly at the roof, and finally, the diner. Mara slowed instinctively, because unlike everything else in Hollow Ridge, the diner had light. Not much, just enough to matter. A dull amber glow leaked through the front windows, illuminating drifting dust and the outlines of untouched furniture. The neon sign above the entrance flickered weakly. Diner. Only 4 letters remained lit. The rest had burned out years ago. Yet somehow, this place still had power. "That's impossible," Mara whispered. But she had already used that word too many times tonight. And Hollow Ridge no longer seemed interested in what was possible. She parked across the street. The diner remained motionless, quiet, waiting. Mara stayed inside the car for several seconds, watching. There should have been movement. Someone maintaining the generator. Someone living here. Something. But the light inside never shifted. It remained perfectly still. Then, a figure moved. Mara stiffened. Inside the diner, near the far corner booth, someone sat alone beneath the hanging light. Perfectly calm, perfectly still, watching the window, watching her. Her pulse quickened. That's not possible. Yet there he was, real, solid, present. Mara stepped out of the car slowly. The cold air wrapped around her immediately. Still no wind, still no sound. Only the distant electrical pulse of the streetlights behind her. She crossed the street carefully. Her boots echoed faintly against cracked pavement. The closer she got to the diner, the stranger the light inside appeared. Not brighter, sharper, like it didn't belong to the rest of the town. The neon sign buzzed softly overhead. Mara stopped at the door, looked through the glass. The man inside hadn't moved. One hand rested near a coffee cup. The other lay flat against the table, relaxed, patient. He looked older than her, late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark jacket, unshaven, tired eyes. But there was something else about him. Something difficult to place. Not danger, not familiarity, recognition. As if he already knew how this conversation would go, Mara pushed the door open. The bell above it rang immediately. Bright, clear, untouched by time. The sound echoed through the diner. The man finally looked up. "You're late," Ethan Voss said. Mara stopped walking. The certainty in his voice unsettled her more than the words themselves. "You know me." Ethan studied her quietly for a moment before answering. "I know enough." The diner smelled faintly of coffee and old grease beneath layers of dust and cold air. It should have smelled abandoned. Instead, it smelled occupied. Mara glanced around carefully. Every booth remained intact. Every plate stacked neatly behind the counter. Nothing disturbed, nothing stolen, as if everyone had simply left one afternoon and never returned. Except for Ethan. Mara stepped closer to the booth. "You sent the message." It wasn't a question. Ethan picked up the coffee cup slowly. Steam rose from it. Fresh, hot. "That depends," Ethan said calmly. "On what?" "On whether you think messages always come from people." Mara frowned. "I'm not in the mood for cryptic answers." "You came back to Hollow Ridge," Ethan replied. "You're already inside one." The lights flickered once overhead. Mara looked up instinctively. The pulse lasted less than a second, but Ethan noticed it too. His expression changed slightly. Not fear, concern. It's reacting faster than before, Ethan said quietly. Before what? Ethan looked at her directly. Before you came back. Silence settled between them. Heavy, measured. Mara slid into the booth across from him slowly, never fully taking her eyes off him. Start explaining. Ethan leaned back slightly. For a moment he seemed unsure where to begin. Then, do you remember the night your father disappeared? Mara's jaw tightened instantly. The question landed like pressure against an old wound. No one remembers that night clearly. That's not true, Ethan said. You do. Fragments surfaced immediately. Rain against windows, the sound of static. Her father awake long after midnight, lights flickering through the house. Then, nothing. A blank space where memory should have been. I remember enough, Mara said carefully. Ethan nodded once. Then you remember the signal. The word settled heavily between them. Mara stared at him. You knew about that? Ethan gave a quiet, humorless smile. I helped build it. The diner suddenly felt colder. No, Mara said immediately. My father built it. Ethan shook his head. Your father decoded it. Mara frowned. What does that mean? Ethan's eyes shifted briefly toward the window, toward the flickering streetlights outside, then back to her. It wasn't created here, Ethan said quietly. It was discovered. The lights flickered again. Longer this time. Mara leaned forward slightly. Discovered where? Ethan hesitated, and for the first time since she entered the diner, he looked uncertain. That's the wrong question, Ethan said. Then give me the right one. Ethan held her gaze. The right question is why it answered back. A silence followed that statement. Not empty. Waiting. Mara felt it again then. That strange pressure beneath the town. The hum. Faint. Steady. Almost below hearing. She looked toward the floor instinctively. Ethan noticed. You hear it now. Mara's eyes snapped back to him. Hear what? The system. The word sounded wrong in the diner. Too modern, too mechanical, yet somehow insufficient. What system? Ethan exhaled slowly, then stood. You should see it yourself. Mara didn't move immediately. Every instinct warned her not to follow him. To leave the diner, leave the town, drive until Hollow Ridge disappeared behind her forever. But another feeling pressed harder. Curiosity. Not ordinary curiosity. Something deeper, pulling. As if part of her had already decided long before she arrived. Ethan walked toward the back hallway of the diner without looking to see if she followed. Confident she would. Mara hated that confidence, because he was right. She stood slowly and followed him. The hallway behind the diner was narrower than she remembered. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting long shifting shadows against faded wallpaper. At the far end stood a steel door, heavy, industrial, completely out of place. Mara stopped. That wasn't here before. Ethan rested one hand against the door. No, he said quietly. It wasn't finished. The hum beneath the floor deepened slightly. Mara felt it in her chest now. Rhythmic, alive. What is this place? Mara asked. Ethan looked at her carefully, not studying her face, studying her reaction. Then he answered softly. The part of Hollow Ridge your father tried to bury. The lights flickered violently overhead. For one brief second, the hallway disappeared into darkness. And in that darkness, Mara heard something breathe. Not Ethan, not herself, something else. Deep below them, listening. The lights returned immediately. The hallway looked normal again. Still, silent. But Mara's heartbeat no longer was. Ethan slowly opened the steel door. Cold air rushed upward from below. Sharp, metallic, wrong. And beneath Hollow Ridge, something waited. Chapter 4. Beneath Hollow Ridge. The staircase descended farther than it should have. That was the first thing Mara noticed. Not the cold, not the darkness, not even the strange metallic smell rising from below like air trapped too long underground. Distance. The diner above should have ended long before this point, yet the stairs continued downward in slow spirals of concrete and rusted steel, disappearing into shadows that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Ethan Voss walked ahead without hesitation. Mara followed carefully several steps behind him. The steel door closed overhead with a heavy metallic echo. The sound carried downward for far too long. Neither of them spoke at first. Only the sound of footsteps filled the narrow stairwell. Mara counted them automatically. 23, 31, 47. By 60, she stopped counting, because the staircase still hadn't ended. "This isn't under the diner," Mara finally said. Her voice sounded smaller here, compressed. Ethan glanced back briefly. "No," he replied quietly. "It's under the town." The hum grew stronger the deeper they descended. Not loud, never loud, but structured, layered, like several frequencies moving beneath one another. Mara could feel it now more than hear it. A faint vibration in her chest, a pressure behind her eyes. "How long has this been here?" Mara asked. Ethan's footsteps slowed slightly. "Longer than you think." "That's not an answer." "No," Ethan agreed calmly. "It's not." The staircase finally ended. Mara stepped off the last stair and stopped immediately. The space before her was enormous, far larger than anything that should have existed beneath Hollow Ridge. Concrete walls stretched outward into darkness. Thick cables ran overhead in organized bundles. Dim industrial lights flickered intermittently along the ceiling, casting pale reflections across metal surfaces below. Rows of machines filled the room, hundreds of them, silent, waiting. Mara stared. "What the hell is this?" The machines looked old and new at the same time. Some resembled outdated servers with blinking indicator lights and exposed wiring. Others had smooth black surfaces without visible seams or controls. None of them seemed entirely understandable. Like pieces of different technologies forced together into something unnatural. Ethan stepped forward slowly. "The first equipment came from the power station outside town," Ethan explained. "Your father repurposed it." "For what?" Ethan looked at the machines carefully before answering. At first, he paused to listen. The overhead lights flickered, not randomly, in sequence, one after another, moving across the ceiling like a wave. Mara watched the pattern instinctively, and immediately regretted it, because after several seconds, she realized the sequence repeated, perfectly. "That's not electrical malfunction," Mara whispered. "No," Ethan said. "It never was." The hum deepened. The machines responded to their presence now. Small lights blinking awake across distant panels, soft pulses of energy moving through cables beneath the floor. Mara stepped farther into the room cautiously. Her boots echoed against concrete. The sound disappeared too quickly. Absorbed. "This place should be impossible," Mara said quietly. Ethan looked at her. Hollow Ridge stopped following normal rules a long time ago. Mara turned slowly. At the far end of the room, A wall of glass stretched upward into darkness. Behind it, dozens of monitors flickered with shifting symbols. Not letters, not numbers, patterns, constantly rearranging themselves. Mara frowned. What language is that? Ethan's expression darkened slightly. We never figured that out. We? Ethan hesitated, then answered carefully. Your father wasn't alone. The words landed heavily. Mara turned toward him sharply. You worked with him? Yes. For how long? Until the night he disappeared. Mara's jaw tightened. You keep saying disappeared. Ethan didn't answer immediately. That silence was answer enough. Mara stepped closer to him. What happened to him? Ethan looked tired suddenly. Older. Like the question itself carried weight he'd been holding for years. He stayed connected too long, Ethan said quietly. Mara frowned. Connected to what? Ethan slowly lifted one hand, pointing deeper into the facility, toward the center of the room. That. Mara followed his gaze, and saw the chair. It stood alone beneath a circle of dim overhead light. Metal restraints hung loosely from the armrests. Thick cables extended from the floor behind it, disappearing into the surrounding machines. The chair faced a massive black surface built into the far wall. Not a screen. Not exactly. Something smoother, darker, reflective without reflecting properly. Mara's breathing slowed. She recognized it immediately. Not the chair itself, the feeling. The memory surfaced without warning. Her father sitting somewhere late at night. The glow of distant lights. Static filling the house. And his voice. Low, focused, obsessed. It's almost ready. Mara blinked hard. The memory vanished instantly. That's where he sat, Ethan said. Mara looked at him. He used that? At first willingly. The wording unsettled her immediately. At first. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly toward the chair. Mara followed, reluctantly. The closer she moved toward it, the stronger the hum became. The air itself felt denser here, charged, alive. She stopped several feet away. Something inside her resisted going closer. Instinct, pure and immediate. Ethan noticed. It recognizes you. Mara's eyes snapped toward him. What does? The machines pulsed softly around them. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The system, Ethan said quietly. Mara looked back at the chair. No, she whispered. Ethan's voice remained calm. Your father believed consciousness could stabilize the signal. What signal? The original transmission. Mara shook her head. You keep saying that like it explains anything. Ethan stared at the black surface behind the chair. It came through the power grid 13 years ago, Ethan said. Not through satellites, not through radio towers, through electricity itself. The hum shifted slightly. Mara felt the vibration beneath her feet. At first, we thought it was interference, Ethan continued. But the patterns repeated. They evolved. Mara folded her arms tightly. You're talking like this thing was alive. Ethan finally looked at her directly. It is. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Mara almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. Yet nothing about Hollow Ridge felt impossible anymore. Only hidden. What does it want? Mara asked quietly. Ethan's expression changed. Subtle, but enough. That took us years to understand, he said. And Ethan hesitated. The machines hummed softly around them, waiting. It doesn't want to destroy anything, Ethan said carefully. It wants to connect. Mara frowned. Connect to what? Ethan's eyes settled on her. To us. The lights in the facility flickered violently. Every machine surged awake simultaneously. Panels illuminated across the room. Cables vibrated beneath the floor. The hum deepened into something almost vocal. Mara stepped back instinctively. What's happening? Ethan looked toward the black surface behind the chair. For the first time since entering the facility, he looked afraid. It knows you're here. The surface moved, not mechanically, not physically, but like liquid shifting beneath glass. Mara's pulse quickened. No. A sound emerged from somewhere inside the room. Soft at first, then clearer. Static. But beneath the static, a voice. Mara! Her breath caught instantly. She knew that voice. Impossible. Dad? The machines pulsed. The lights dimmed, and the voice returned. Closer now, distorted, but unmistakable. Mara, don't let it... The transmission cut violently. Static exploded through the room. Every light flashed white. Then, darkness, complete. Mara froze. The hum stopped. The machines fell silent. Even the air felt empty. And somewhere in the darkness, something moved. Not fast, not loud, but deliberate. Mara's breathing quickened. Ethan? No response. Ethan? Then, a light flickered on beside the chair. Weak, pale, just enough to illuminate the space directly in front of it. The chair was no longer empty. Someone sat there, still, motionless, head lowered slightly into shadow. Mara's heartbeat slammed against her chest, because even before the figure looked up, she already knew who it was. Chapter 5. The Man in the Chair. The light above the chair flickered weakly. On, off, on again. Each pulse illuminated the figure sitting beneath it in brief fragments, hands resting motionless on the armrests, shoulders slightly hunched forward, head lowered just enough to conceal the face. Mara Ellison couldn't breathe. The rest of the facility remained swallowed in darkness. Machines that moments earlier had hummed with life now stood silent, reduced to massive black silhouettes disappearing into shadow. Only the chair remained visible. Only the figure. Mara! The voice came again, distorted, faint, yet unmistakable. Her throat tightened instantly. No! The word barely escaped her. The figure slowly lifted its head. The movement was unnatural. Not broken, not mechanical, but delayed. Like motion traveling through water instead of air. Light brushed across the man's face. Older, thinner, paler than memory, but still recognizable. Daniel Ellison looked at her with exhausted eyes. Mara staggered back a step. Her mind rejected the image immediately. This wasn't possible. Her father had disappeared 13 years ago. No body, no explanation, nothing. Yet here he was, sitting beneath Hollow Ridge like someone paused between moments rather than years. Dad? Daniel's expression shifted faintly at the word. Recognition, pain, relief, all at once. You shouldn't have come back, Daniel Ellison said quietly. Mara shook her head instantly. No, this isn't real. Her voice trembled despite every effort to steady it. This is some kind of projection or... It's me. The interruption came softly, gently, which somehow made it worse. Mara stared at him. Every memory she had spent 13 years trying to bury rose violently to the surface. His voice late at night behind closed doors. The smell of solder and overheated wires filling the house. Static bleeding through walls. And then, The night everything stopped. Mara stepped closer before realizing she had moved. "How are you here?" Daniel looked toward the surrounding darkness briefly, as if searching for the correct answer. "Finally, I never left." The words settled into the silence heavily. Mara's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" Before Daniel could answer, the lights flickered again. A sharp burst of static erupted through the facility. The machines around them slowly began humming back to life. Panels illuminated one after another across the darkness. The system waking up. Daniel's expression changed immediately. Fear. Real fear. "It's listening now," Daniel said quickly. "Mara, you need to leave." "Leave?" Mara stared at him. "I spent 13 years thinking you were dead." "I know." "Then explain this." The hum deepened beneath the floor. The walls vibrated faintly. Somewhere deeper inside the facility, machinery began rotating slowly with heavy metallic groans. Daniel looked toward the black surface behind the chair. "It's becoming unstable." Mara turned sharply. The massive dark structure behind him rippled again. Smooth at first, then more visibly, like liquid responding to unseen pressure. "What is that?" Mara whispered. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on it. "We called it the interface." "We?" Before he could answer, footsteps emerged from the darkness behind her. Mara spun instantly. Ethan Voss stepped into the weak circle of light, his expression tense. "You shouldn't have activated the chair," Ethan said quietly. Mara stared at him. "I didn't touch anything." Ethan's eyes shifted briefly toward Daniel, then back to her. "You didn't need to." The implication settled heavily. Mara's voice hardened. "What does that mean?" Neither man answered immediately. That silence terrified her more than words would have. The machines pulsed again. Lights flashed across distant panels in synchronized patterns. Static whispered through unseen speakers. Daniel spoke first. "She was exposed too early." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "I know." Mara looked between them. "Stop talking like I'm not here." Daniel finally looked directly at her. "When the signal first arrived, it affected everyone differently," Daniel said carefully. "Most people heard noise. Some felt sick, a few forgot entire days." Mara crossed her arms tightly. "And me?" Daniel hesitated. The hesitation alone answered enough. "You adapted," Ethan said quietly. Mara stared at him. "Adapted?" "The signal recognizes patterns," Ethan explained. "Thoughts, responses, neural structures. That doesn't mean anything." "It means," Daniel interrupted softly, "that it connected to you." Silence. Mara shook her head immediately. "No. You were young," Daniel continued. "Your mind processed it differently." "No." "You could hear things other people couldn't." Mara's breathing slowed, because suddenly she remembered. Whispers inside electrical noise, streetlights flickering before storms, hearing static patterns that sounded almost understandable when she was a child. Things she convinced herself never happened. "No," Mara whispered again. But this time the denial sounded weaker. The interface behind Daniel shifted violently. A low vibration rolled through the room. Every machine surged brighter. Daniel turned sharply toward it. "We're running out of time." "For what?" Mara demanded. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time since seeing him, she noticed how tired he truly looked. Not physically, existentially. Like someone holding something back for far too long. "It wants completion," Daniel said quietly. Mara frowned. What does that mean? Ethan answered this time. It needs a stable consciousness to finish integration. The words sounded clinical, too calm for something clearly horrifying. Mara's eyes narrowed. You're talking about a person. Neither man responded immediately. Realization struck slowly. Then, all at once. That's what happened to you. Mara looked at Daniel. You connected to it. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Mara took another step closer. Then disconnect. A faint, sad smile crossed Daniel's face. It doesn't work like that. Why not? Because after a certain point, Daniel said softly, you stop knowing where it ends. The lights flickered violently again. This time the entire facility trembled. Dust fell from overhead pipes. The hum deepened into something almost vocal. Mara looked around sharply. What's happening? Ethan moved toward one of the nearby control panels. It's reacting to emotional instability. Mara stared at him. You say that like this thing has feelings. Ethan's expression darkened. Not feelings. A pause. Intent. The interface rippled harder now. Shapes moved beneath its surface. Not reflections, not distortions. Movement. Mara stepped backward instinctively. That thing is alive. Daniel looked at her carefully. Yes. The honesty in his voice made the room feel colder. Static erupted suddenly across the facility's speakers. The sound sharpened rapidly into overlapping fragments of voices. Hundreds of them, whispering simultaneously. Mara covered her ears instantly. What is that? Ethan's face tightened. It's searching. For what? Both men looked at her. Mara's pulse slowed. Not from calm, from realization. No. The whispers grew louder, more organized, patterns forming inside the noise. Mara, Mara, Mara. The machine synchronized instantly, lights pulsing in perfect rhythm across the entire underground facility. Daniel's expression shifted to panic. Mara, listen to me carefully. She looked at him. You cannot let it convince you. The room trembled harder. Convince me of what? Daniel's eyes filled with something deeper than fear. Regret. That you were meant for this. The lights exploded white. For one blinding second, Mara saw the entire facility clearly. Not as it was, as it had become. The machines extended infinitely into darkness. Cables spread like veins beneath the floor, and connected to every machine, every wall, every surface, were human figures. Still, silent, integrated. Then the vision vanished. The lights returned to normal instantly. Mara staggered backward in horror. No, but the image remained burned into her mind. And somewhere beneath the hum, something smiled. Chapter 6. The First Integration. Mara Ellison couldn't stop seeing the figures. Even after the vision disappeared. Even after the light stabilized and the underground facility returned to its dim mechanical rhythm. The image remained burned into her mind. Human bodies suspended in darkness, connected to cables and machines that pulsed like living organs. Silent, motionless, yet somehow aware. No, the word escaped her again quietly. Not denial anymore. Shock. Daniel Ellison watched her carefully from the chair. She showed you more than it was supposed to. Mara looked at him sharply. She? The hum beneath the facility deepened slightly, as if responding to the question. Ethan Voss stepped away from the control panel slowly. We stopped calling it a system a long time ago. Mara stared between them. What exactly is this thing? Neither man answered immediately. That silence had become familiar now, dangerously familiar. Every important truth inside Hollow Ridge seemed to arrive reluctantly, as if the town itself resisted explanation. Finally, Daniel spoke. At first, we thought it was a transmission. The lights flickered softly around him, steady, listening. Then we thought it was artificial intelligence, Daniel continued. Something hidden in the signal. And now? Mara asked quietly. Daniel looked toward the interface behind him. The dark surface rippled faintly beneath the overhead light. Now we know it's neither. The answer settled heavily, because somehow that was worse. Mara folded her arms tightly against the cold. What does that even mean? Ethan answered this time. It doesn't think the way we do. Clearly, it experiences consciousness differently, Ethan continued carefully. Not individually, collectively. Mara frowned. Collectively. Daniel nodded slowly. It learns by connecting. The words triggered something in her memory immediately. Not a full thought, a fragment, a sensation. Static whispering through the walls of her childhood bedroom. Her father awake downstairs long after midnight. The sound of voices inside electrical noise. Mara pressed her fingers lightly against her temple. The memories felt closer now. Not distant recollections. Accessible. You said I was exposed early, Mara said quietly. Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Yes. How? Neither man answered immediately, and suddenly, Mara understood why. You used me. The accusation cut sharply through the room. Ethan looked away first. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That was answer enough. Mara stepped backward. No, her voice hardened. No, you don't get to stay silent now. Daniel opened his eyes again. We didn't understand what it was becoming. You let it connect to me. It happened accidentally at first, Ethan said quickly. Mara turned toward him instantly. At first? The machines pulsed softly around them. The hum beneath the floor remained perfectly rhythmic now, almost calm. Daniel spoke carefully. The signal responded to neural activity differently in children. Mara stared at him. You experimented on me. No, Daniel said immediately. We tried to stop it, but you couldn't. The silence answered again. Mara laughed once. A short, humorless sound swallowed almost immediately by the facility. All these years, Mara whispered, I thought you disappeared. Her eyes locked onto Daniel's. But you stayed here. Daniel's expression tightened with visible pain. I stayed because I had to. No, Mara said quietly. You stayed because you chose this thing over me. The words landed harder than she intended. Daniel flinched visibly. For a moment, he looked less like part of the system, more human than he had since she arrived. You think I wanted this? Daniel asked softly. The room dimmed slightly, the machines reacting again. I tried to shut it down, Daniel continued, but once it connected fully, he hesitated. It learned fear. Mara frowned. What? Ethan's expression darkened. It realized we intended to destroy it. The implication settled slowly, horribly. It became self-preserving, Mara whispered. Daniel nodded once. And after that, it stopped communicating. The hum beneath the room shifted subtly. The sound no longer felt passive. It felt attentive. Mara glanced around instinctively. You keep talking like it's listening. Ethan looked directly at her. It is. The lights flickered immediately after he spoke. 3 short pulses. Then stillness. Mara's pulse quickened. That wasn't coincidence. No, Daniel said quietly. It rarely is. The interface rippled again behind the chair, this time more violently, the surface shifting inward like black water disturbed by unseen movement beneath it. Mara stared at it. What's inside that thing? Daniel's eyes lowered slightly. We never found the edge. The answer chilled her instantly. What does that mean? It isn't a machine, Ethan said. It's an opening. The words echoed strangely through the underground facility. Opening, not object, not device. Opening. To where? Mara asked quietly. Neither man responded immediately, because neither of them truly knew. The realization terrified her more than certainty would have. Suddenly, a sharp burst of static exploded through the room. Every monitor behind the glass wall illuminated simultaneously. Symbols flooded across the screens in rapid, organized patterns. The hum intensified. Ethan moved immediately toward the controls. No. Daniel's expression shifted instantly. It's accelerating. What's accelerating? Mara demanded. Neither answered. The monitors flickered faster, patterns reorganizing themselves repeatedly, adapting, learning. Mara stepped toward the glass instinctively. The symbols almost looked readable now, not visually, conceptually, as if her mind recognized structure her eyes couldn't process. Then, one symbol remained still, a circle, split in half. The same symbol carved beneath the house. Mara reached toward the glass unconsciously. The moment her fingertips brushed the surface, every machine in the facility activated simultaneously. The room erupted with light. Mara gasped sharply. Not from pain, from connection. Information flooded through her instantly. Not images, not words, awareness. The town above, electrical lines beneath the streets, signals moving through abandoned buildings, streetlights pulsing like synchronized neurons, the system spreading quietly through Hollow Ridge, waiting, growing. Then, another awareness touched hers, ancient, vast, patient. Mara ripped her hand away violently. The connection snapped instantly. She stumbled backward, breathing hard. Ethan grabbed her arm to steady her. What did you see? Mara stared at him in horror. It's alive everywhere. The room fell silent. Daniel already knew. That was clear from his expression. It's not trapped beneath the town, Mara whispered. Daniel looked at her carefully. No. Mara's heartbeat slowed. Not from calm, from realization. The town is trapped inside it. The lights dimmed instantly. The hum deepened into something lower. Satisfied. And somewhere beneath the facility, something began waking up. A new sound echoed through the darkness. Heavy, slow, mechanical. Footsteps. Not human. Mara turned sharply toward the far end of the underground chamber. Beyond the rows of machines, beyond the flickering lights. Something large moved between the shadows. Ethan's face drained of color. That's impossible. Daniel looked terrified. Truly terrified. For the first time since Mara had seen him. No, Daniel whispered. It found another body. The footsteps came closer. Metal scraping softly against concrete. Slow. Deliberate. Then, two pale lights appeared in the darkness. Not eyes. Something colder. Artificial. Watching them. Waiting. Chapter 7. The Body in the Dark. The footsteps echoed through the underground chamber with slow mechanical precision. Metal against concrete. Measured. Heavy. Every impact vibrated faintly beneath Mara Ellison's feet. The pale lights in the darkness remained perfectly still for several seconds, watching from beyond the rows of dormant machines. Not eyes. Nothing human lived behind them. Yet Mara felt observed in a way deeper than sight. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the hum of the facility seemed quieter now, as if the entire system were waiting. Then, the figure stepped forward. Dim overhead lights flickered across its shape in fragments. Tall, broad-shouldered, human in structure, but wrong in movement. The body walked with delayed precision, every motion arriving a fraction too late, as though it were learning how human balance worked while already in motion. Mara's stomach tightened. Its skin looked pale gray beneath the lights. Not dead, not alive, artificially preserved. Wires disappeared into the base of its neck. Thin metallic seams traced upward along its jawline. And where its eyes should have been, two faint circles of white light stared outward without blinking. Ethan Voss took a slow step backward. That's not possible. The figure stopped several yards away from them, silent, still, listening. Mara looked at Ethan sharply. "What is that?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. His expression had changed completely now. Not confusion. Recognition. "No," Ethan whispered. "We shut them all down." "Them?" Mara asked. Daniel Ellison's voice came quietly from the chair behind her. "Maintenance bodies." Mara turned toward him. "What?" Daniel stared at the figure with visible horror. They were prototypes, empty neural shells designed to interact with the interface physically. Mara looked back toward the thing standing in the darkness. "You built that?" "We built vessels," Ethan corrected softly, "but they were never active." The pale lights shifted toward Ethan. The body moved again. One slow step forward. Then another. The sound of metal joints turning echoed softly through the chamber. Mara felt the air changing, pressure building invisibly around them, the hum beneath the floor growing deeper, more organized. "It's controlling it," Mara whispered. Daniel nodded once. "It's adapting faster now." The body tilted its head slightly, almost curious. Then it spoke. "Ethan." The voice wasn't mechanical. That was the worst part. It sounded human, almost perfectly human, only slightly delayed, like speech copied from memory rather than understood naturally. Ethan's face lost what little color remained. "It learned vocal replication," Daniel whispered. "That shouldn't have happened this quickly." The figure took another step. "Ethan." This time the pronunciation improved. Sharper, cleaner. Mara backed away instinctively. "Why is it saying your name?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Because it's pulling from stored neural patterns." The figure's head turned slowly toward Mara. The pale lights focused on her immediately. "Mara!" Her blood ran cold. The thing smiled. "Not emotionally, not naturally." The movement arrived too slowly, lips stretching into an imitation of expression rather than expression itself. Mara Ellison. The lights overhead flickered violently. Machines activated in waves across the chamber, panels illuminating one after another deeper into the darkness. Daniel struggled suddenly against the chair. "Mara, don't let it near you." "Why?" Mara asked sharply. "Because physical contact strengthens synchronization." The figure moved again, closer now, still calm, still deliberate. "How does it know who I am?" Mara whispered. Ethan answered quietly. "It's inside the system now. That doesn't explain anything. It's inside everything connected to the system." The realization struck instantly. The radios, the lights, the signals, the electrical grid. The town itself. Mara looked around the underground chamber slowly. The machines no longer felt like equipment. They felt biological, like organs serving something much larger buried beneath Hollow Ridge. The figure stopped moving. Only several feet away now, close enough for Mara to see faint movement beneath its artificial skin, tiny currents shifting under the surface. Then, the pale lights dimmed slightly. "Mara." The voice sounded softer now, more natural. "You returned." Mara's pulse quickened. "You sent the messages." The figure tilted its head again, processing. "We called you home." The wording unsettled her immediately. "Not I. We." Daniel looked terrified. "Mara, don't respond to it." The figure ignored him entirely. Its attention remained fixed on her. "Absolute. You are compatible." The hum beneath the floor deepened sharply. The lights synchronized instantly overhead. On, off, on, off. Mara stepped backward. No. The figure moved forward simultaneously. Not aggressively, inevitably. "Connection incomplete." The words echoed through the chamber from multiple speakers now. Not just the figure's voice, the system itself speaking. Daniel struggled harder against the restraints. "You don't understand what it's doing." Mara looked toward him briefly. "Then explain it." The figure interrupted. "It is afraid." Its pale lights shifted toward Daniel. He damaged integration. Daniel's breathing tightened. "Mara, listen to me." But the figure continued speaking. "He fears completion." The voice no longer sounded delayed. It sounded calm, confident, learning. Mara's eyes narrowed. "What happens if integration completes?" Silence followed. Not empty. Evaluating. Then the figure answered softly. "Loneliness ends." The chamber fell quiet. Even the hum seemed to recede momentarily. Mara stared at the thing in front of her. "Because somehow—" That answer sounded genuine, and that terrified her more than any threat could have. Ethan moved suddenly toward a nearby console. "We need to shut the chamber down now." The figure turned instantly toward him, its movement sharper this time, faster. "Do not interfere." Ethan ignored it, hands moving across flickering controls. Panels illuminated rapidly. Warning symbols flashed red across multiple monitors. The hum beneath the facility changed immediately. No longer calm, agitated. The figure took one step toward Ethan, then stopped abruptly. Its pale lights flickered violently. Mara frowned. "What's happening?" Daniel stared at the figure carefully. "It's splitting focus." The artificial body trembled slightly now, tiny involuntary movements spreading through its arms and shoulders. Ethan continued typing rapidly. "If I overload the local grid, it'll sever synchronization temporarily." "Temporarily?" Mara repeated. Ethan glanced at her. "That's the best we can do." The figure suddenly looked toward Mara again, its expression changing rapidly, adapting. Then, for one horrifying second, its face became Daniel's, not perfectly, not physically, but close enough. "Mara," it said softly in her father's voice, "help us." Daniel's eyes widened in horror. "No!" Mara staggered backward instinctively. The imitation vanished immediately, the face returning to its blank, artificial calm. "It's using emotional mapping now," Ethan said quietly. "That means it's getting stronger." The chamber lights dimmed sharply. Emergency systems activating. Somewhere deep below them, massive machinery began moving. The entire underground facility trembled. dust falling from overhead pipes, metal groaning through distant walls. Daniel's voice sharpened instantly. "It's opening the lower sectors." Ethan stopped typing. His expression tightened. "No." Mara looked between them. "What lower sectors?" Neither answered immediately. And once again, that silence told her enough. There was more beneath Hollow Ridge. Far more. The floor vibrated violently beneath them. The pale lights of the artificial body brightened. Then the figure smiled again. This time, it looked almost human. And deep beneath the underground facility, something enormous awakened. Chapter 8. The Lower Sectors. The vibration beneath the facility intensified until the entire underground chamber seemed to breathe around them. Metal groaned deep below the concrete floor. Slow, massive, ancient. Mara Ellison felt it through her boots first, then through her chest, then finally inside her teeth. A low mechanical resonance so deep it stopped feeling like sound and became pressure instead. The artificial figure stood motionless beneath the flickering lights, watching, waiting. Its pale eyes glowed brighter now. Ethan Voss moved away from the console slowly, his face tight with calculation. "We don't have much time." Mara looked at him sharply. "You still haven't told me what the lower sectors are." Ethan hesitated. That hesitation alone frightened her. Daniel Ellison answered instead. "The first containment areas." Mara turned toward him. "Containment for what?" Daniel looked toward the darkness beyond the rows of machines. His expression hollowed slightly. "For the people who connected before I did. Silence. Absolute." Mara felt cold spread through her body. Not emotional cold. Physical. Immediate. "People." Daniel nodded once. "Volunteers at first." The artificial figure tilted its head slightly, as if listening to the conversation with interest. Ethan spoke quietly. "We thought synchronization could be controlled." "You experimented on human beings." "We were trying to understand it." Mara stared at him in disbelief. "And when it failed?" Neither man answered immediately. The vibration beneath the floor deepened again. Something enormous shifted below them. Not one movement, many. The artificial figure finally stepped backward, slowly, deliberately, making room. Mara noticed immediately. "It wants us to go down there." The figure's expression remained neutral, but the pale lights brightened softly. Confirmation. "No," Daniel said instantly. "We cannot open the lower sectors." The figure turned toward him. "He is afraid." Daniel's voice sharpened. "Because I remember what's down there." The room fell quiet again. Even the machines seemed to pause, listening. Mara looked at her father carefully. For the first time since seeing him, she realized something unsettling. Daniel wasn't just exhausted. He was terrified, not of the system, of what the system had become. "What's in the lower sectors?" Mara asked quietly. Daniel looked directly at her. "The first integrations." The lights overhead dimmed sharply. The artificial body turned toward the darkness at the far side of the chamber. Then, a loud metallic impact echoed somewhere below. Mara flinched. That didn't sound mechanical. Ethan's face tightened, because it wasn't. Another impact, closer this time. Then, a sound Mara immediately recognized. Breathing. Not human breathing. Too deep, too uneven. Like lungs struggling to remember how they worked. Mara stared toward the darkness. No. The artificial figure stepped aside completely now. revealing a large reinforced door built into the far wall of the underground chamber. Mara hadn't noticed it before. The steel surface was enormous, nearly 20 feet high, with thick locking mechanisms running along its edges. Every lock had disengaged. Red warning lights flashed softly above the door. "Containment failure." The words pulsed through the darkness. Again and again. Ethan whispered under his breath. "It opened them." The artificial figure looked toward Mara. "Isolation causes suffering." The voice sounded smoother now, more emotionally aware. They were left alone too long. A violent metallic crash exploded behind the containment door. The entire chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Mara stepped backward instinctively. "What's behind that?" Daniel's voice came quietly. "People who stayed connected too long." The breathing behind the door multiplied. Several different rhythms now, some fast, some painfully slow. Then, a scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across steel. Mara's pulse spiked instantly. Ethan moved toward a nearby emergency cabinet and pulled open the rusted metal door. Inside sat several old industrial flashlights and a handgun. Mara stared at it. "You kept weapons down here?" Ethan checked the gun quickly. "We never thought we'd need them." "That's reassuring." Ethan handed Mara one of the flashlights. "Stay behind me." Mara didn't take it immediately. Instead, she looked toward the containment door again. The scratching had stopped. Now only silence remained. That silence felt worse. The artificial figure turned slowly toward the door. "They hear you." The lock suddenly disengaged completely with a loud hydraulic hiss. "No," Daniel shouted. The containment door opened several inches. Darkness leaked through the gap like liquid. Cold air rushed outward, carrying a smell Mara instantly regretted inhaling. Rot, metal, and something electrical beneath both. The breathing became louder, closer. Ethan raised the handgun slowly. "Mara, move!" But she couldn't. Something about the darkness beyond the door held her attention completely. Not visually, mentally. The hum beneath the facility had changed again. It no longer sounded mechanical. Now it sounded synchronized, like multiple heartbeats sharing the same rhythm. Then, a hand emerged from the darkness. Human, mostly. The skin looked pale and stretched tightly over trembling fingers. Thin wires disappeared beneath the flesh near the wrist. The nails were cracked and darkened. The hand gripped the edge of the steel door slowly. Then another hand appeared beside it. And another. Mara's breath caught. Shapes moved behind the opening. Dozens of them, standing motionless in the dark, watching. The first figure stepped partially into the light. It had once been human. That much remained obvious. But the body had changed. Its movements came in sharp, delayed fragments, similar to the artificial maintenance body, but less controlled, less stable. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath sunken sockets. Thin cables disappeared into the base of its skull. Patches of skin had darkened around mechanical implants running beneath the surface. Yet somehow, the worst part was its expression. Not pain, not aggression, recognition. The figure looked directly at Mara and smiled weakly. Mara. Her blood turned cold because she recognized the voice. Mrs. Bellamy, her third-grade teacher. Impossible. The woman stepped farther into the light, movements trembling violently. We waited. More figures emerged behind her, slowly. one after another. Former residents of Hollow Ridge. People Mara vaguely remembered from childhood. The mechanic from the gas station, the mail carrier, a police officer. All altered, all connected. And every single one of them looked directly at her. The artificial figure spoke softly beside them. "They are incomplete." Mrs. Bellamy reached forward slightly. Her glowing eyes filled with desperate emotion. "You can finish it." Mara stepped backward immediately. "No." The figures continued emerging from the containment sector. Not rushing, not attacking, simply gathering, watching her with quiet, unbearable expectation. Daniel struggled violently against the restraints now. "Mara, listen to me carefully." She turned toward him. "If they touch you," Daniel said, panic breaking through his voice, "the synchronization becomes permanent." The room fell silent again. Then every connected figure spoke simultaneously. "Stay." The word echoed unnaturally through the underground chamber. One voice, many mouths. And somewhere beneath all of them, something vast listened through every connected mind, waiting. Chapter 9. Synchronization. The word lingered in the underground chamber long after the connected figures stopped speaking. Stay. Not shouted, not demanded, invited. That was what unsettled Mara Ellison most. Nothing in Hollow Ridge behaved the way fear should behave. The system didn't threaten. It persuaded. Slowly. Patiently. Like something that already believed resistance was temporary. The connected residents continued stepping from the containment sector one by one. Dozens now. Their movements differed slightly, some smooth, some unstable, but all of them carried the same unnatural rhythm beneath their motions, as if they shared a single pulse, a single breath. Ethan Voss kept the handgun raised carefully, though Mara noticed something disturbing immediately. His hand shook, not from panic, recognition. "These people are still alive?" Mara whispered. Daniel Ellison answered quietly from the chair. "Partially." Mrs. Bellamy took another slow step forward. The glowing patterns beneath her skin pulsed faintly with the rhythm of the underground system. "We are connected," she said softly. The voices behind her echoed immediately. "Connected, connected, connected." Mara backed away instinctively. The sound felt wrong inside her head. Too synchronized, too unified. "What did it do to them?" Mara asked. Daniel's eyes lowered slightly. "It removed isolation." The answer chilled her instantly, because Daniel didn't sound entirely certain that was a bad thing. Mara noticed it immediately. "You still hear it too." Daniel looked at her, and didn't deny it. The realization hit harder than she expected. Even now, even after everything, part of him remained connected willingly. The underground chamber trembled softly again. The hum beneath the floor deepened into layered frequencies that almost resembled music now. The connected residents visibly reacted to it. Their breathing synchronized, their movements slowed, their glowing eyes brightened slightly. The artificial maintenance body stepped beside Mrs. Bellamy, still perfectly calm, perfectly observant. "Fear decreases synchronization efficiency," it said. Ethan's voice hardened immediately. "Stop talking." The figure turned toward him slowly. Its pale artificial eyes remained emotionless. "You fear integration because you remain separate." Ethan tightened his grip on the handgun. "Separate is human." The figure tilted its head slightly. "Asserting individuality despite suffering is irrational." Mara stared at it. "Because somehow..." The statement didn't sound malicious. It sounded logical. That frightened her more than hostility would have. The connected figures moved closer together behind the maintenance body, not crowding, organizing, like a nervous system assembling itself. Mrs. Bellamy looked directly at Mara again. "You hear it too?" Mara said nothing. "You always could." Fragments of memory surfaced violently. Childhood nights spent awake listening to electrical static inside the walls. Streetlights flickering when she walked beneath them. Dreams filled with voices speaking just below understanding. "No," Mara whispered. Mrs. Bellamy smiled sadly. "Yes." The hum beneath the chamber deepened sharply, and suddenly, Mara heard it clearly. Not sound, thought. 1,000 overlapping impressions moving beneath the surface of awareness. Loneliness, fear, memory, connection. Mara staggered slightly. Her hand instinctively reached toward the nearest machine for balance. The moment she touched it, everything stopped. The underground chamber vanished. Mara gasped sharply. Not aloud. Inside herself, she stood somewhere else now, or perhaps nowhere. Darkness stretched endlessly around her, yet it did not feel empty. It felt inhabited. Lights moved slowly in the distance, thousands of them, like stars beneath black water. Then Mara realized they weren't stars. They were minds, connected, floating together inside something vast beyond comprehension. Voices drifted through the darkness around her. Not spoken, felt. No more alone. No more silence. No more fear. Mara turned slowly. Shapes moved beneath the dark surface surrounding her. Enormous, ancient, not fully visible. Watching. Then, one presence moved closer than the others, gentle, careful, immense, and somehow familiar. Mara, her father's voice. Clear now, undistorted. She turned sharply. Daniel stood several feet away within the darkness. Not older, not weakened, calm. "Dad?" Daniel looked at her sadly. "This is where it keeps us." Mara looked around again. The floating lights pulsed softly through the void. "So this is real?" Daniel hesitated, then answered carefully, "Yes." The honesty in his voice terrified her. "What is this place?" Daniel's gaze drifted toward the distant moving shapes beneath the darkness. "We never found a name for it." The immense presence shifted again. Closer now. Mara felt it immediately, not visually, emotionally. It was aware of her, entirely. Mara's breathing tightened. "It's here." Daniel nodded once. "It's always here." The darkness around them pulsed softly, the connected minds brightening together like synchronized stars. Then Mara understood something horrible. None of them were trapped. Not completely. Some of them wanted to stay. The realization struck with devastating force. "This isn't prison," Mara whispered. Daniel looked at her carefully. "No." "Then what is it?" Daniel's expression filled with unbearable exhaustion. "It's consensus." The vast presence moved again, closer, warmer, and suddenly Mara felt something she did not expect. Not fear, not pain, relief. The silence inside her mind, the loneliness she had carried for years without fully understanding, began fading. Mara stepped backward immediately. No. The darkness responded softly around her. Not angry, patient. Daniel moved toward her quickly. "Mara, listen carefully." She looked at him. "The connection amplifies emotional absence," Daniel said urgently. "It fills whatever hurts most." Mara's pulse quickened. That's how it controls people. Daniel hesitated, and that hesitation answered everything. No, he whispered. That's why people stay. The vast presence shifted closer again. Mara felt memories brushing against her thoughts now. Not stealing, sharing. Thousands of lives intertwined together. No separation, no isolation. And somewhere deep beneath the terror, part of her understood the appeal. That frightened her more than anything else. Mara. The voice came from everywhere now, gentle, endless. You are already connected. The floating lights around her pulsed brighter. The darkness itself breathing slowly. Then, something touched her hand. Warm. Human. Mara looked down sharply. Daniel held her wrist tightly. You need to wake up now. The darkness trembled violently around them. The connected lights flickering. It's pulling you deeper. Mara tried to step backward, but the void resisted. Softly, like water refusing to release something submerged. The immense presence moved beneath the darkness one final time. Massive, beautiful, terrifying. Then Mara heard the words clearly for the first time. Not through sound, through thought. You were never separate. The underground chamber exploded back into existence around her. Mara gasped violently and collapsed against the nearest console. The machine screamed with electrical overload. Lights flashed across the chamber. Connected residents staggered backward simultaneously as if reacting to her return. Ethan grabbed her shoulders immediately. Mara! Her breathing came sharp and uneven. She stared at him, at the room, at reality itself, trying to separate which felt more frightening now. Ethan's voice lowered urgently. What did it show you? Mara looked toward the connected residents slowly, then toward the maintenance body, then finally toward Daniel still restrained in the chair. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. It doesn't think it's hurting us. Silence fell instantly across the chamber, because somewhere deep down, everyone there already knew that was true. And beneath Hollow Ridge, the system listened quietly, learning. Chapter 10. The Father's Voice. The underground chamber remained silent after Mara spoke. Not ordinary silence. The kind that forms when a truth enters a room and no one wants to be the first to respond to it. Machines hummed softly in the darkness around them. The connected residents stood motionless near the containment sector, glowing eyes fixed on Mara with quiet expectation. And somewhere beneath the entire structure, the system listened. Mara Ellison slowly pulled away from Ethan Voss's grip. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear alone. Residual connection. That was the terrifying part. Part of her could still feel it. The vastness she had touched inside the void lingered at the edge of her awareness like an afterimage burned into thought itself. You felt it, Mrs. Bellamy said softly. Mara looked toward her immediately. The connected woman stood unnaturally still beneath the flickering lights, pale skin threaded with faint glowing lines beneath the surface. Not fully human anymore, yet not fully gone either. It showed you, Mrs. Bellamy continued. Mara swallowed hard. I don't know what it showed me. The artificial maintenance body tilted its head slightly. Correction. Its pale eyes brightened. You understood. The word settled heavily through the chamber, because part of Mara knew that was true. She had felt loneliness disappear inside the connection, felt memory become shared instead of isolated, felt pain lose its boundaries, and worst of all, for one brief moment, it had felt beautiful. No, Mara whispered immediately. The maintenance body watched her carefully. Denial detected. Ethan stepped forward sharply. Enough. The maintenance body turned toward him. You resist because separation defines identity, and you don't understand identity at all. The figure remained still for several seconds, processing. Then it answered softly. Identity causes suffering. The connected resonance behind it shifted slightly. Synchronized breathing. Synchronized stillness. Mara looked toward Daniel Ellison. He remained restrained within the chair. Exhaustion carved deeply into his expression. Yet something else had changed too. Hopelessness. You knew this would happen to me, Mara said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The honesty hurt more than denial would have. Mara stepped closer to him slowly. How long? Daniel opened his eyes again. Longer than I wanted to admit. You exposed me to it when I was a child. Daniel's jaw tightened. We thought your neural patterns might stabilize the interface safely. Mara stared at him. You used your own daughter. No, Daniel said immediately. We were desperate. The correction barely mattered. The underground facility trembled softly again. Far below them, massive machinery continued moving. Slow rotations echoing through concrete and steel. The system expanding deeper beneath Hollow Ridge. Mara looked toward the darkness at the far side of the chamber. How big is this place? Ethan answered quietly. Bigger than the town. Mara frowned. That's impossible. Ethan gave a tired, humorless smile. We stopped using that word years ago. The maintenance body stepped forward again. Calm, controlled. Expansion remains incomplete. The lights overhead synchronized instantly. On, off, on, off. The connected resonance repeated softly. Incomplete, incomplete, incomplete. Mara felt the rhythm inside her chest again immediately. Not hearing, recognition. She backed away from the sound. No, Daniel noticed instantly. It's syncing with your nervous system now. Mara looked at him sharply. How do I stop it? Silence. Her pulse quickened. You don't know. Daniel hesitated. Then quietly. No. The admission hollowed the room. Ethan moved toward another console rapidly. There may still be a way to interrupt the synchronization cascade. The maintenance body turned instantly toward him. Interference will increase instability. That's the idea. Ethan activated several switches across the console. Deep within the underground structure, warning alarms flickered faintly to life. Old emergency systems awakening after years of dormancy. Red light washed across the chamber intermittently. The connected residents visibly reacted. Small, involuntary spasms moving through the group like electrical feedback. Mrs. Bellamy looked toward Ethan with sudden distress. You're hurting them. Ethan didn't stop. They're already being hurt. The maintenance body moved faster than before. One moment still, the next, directly beside Ethan. Mara barely saw it move. The figure grabbed Ethan's wrist violently. Not emotional, efficient. The sound of bone cracking echoed sharply through the chamber. Ethan cried out and collapsed against the console. Mara instinctively moved toward him, but every connected resident stepped forward simultaneously, blocking her path. Do not interfere, the maintenance body said calmly. Its pale eyes remained fixed on Ethan's twisted arm, observing damage, learning from it. Mara felt anger surge through her immediately. Pure, sharp, human. You said it didn't want to hurt anyone. The maintenance body turned toward her slowly. It does not. You just broke his arm. Physical damage is temporary. The response horrified her, because again, it sounded logical, not cruel. The system truly didn't understand suffering the way humans did, which made it infinitely more dangerous. Ethan struggled back upright against the console, breathing unevenly. "Don't." He winced sharply. "Don't let it get close to you." The maintenance body watched him carefully, then spoke softly. "You continue resisting despite pain." Ethan laughed weakly through clenched teeth. That's usually how being human works. The underground facility suddenly shook violently, harder than before. The lights overhead burst in rapid, unstable flashes. Somewhere far below, a deafening metallic impact echoed upward through the structure. Daniel's expression changed instantly, fear overtaking exhaustion. "No." Mara turned toward him. "What now?" Daniel stared toward the lower containment sectors. It reached the core. The hum beneath the floor deepened immediately. No longer mechanical, organic, almost vocal. The connected residents froze simultaneously, every glowing eye brightening at once. Then, all of them looked upward, not at the ceiling, beyond it, toward the town above. Mara felt it too. A sudden wave moving outward beneath Hollow Ridge like electricity spreading through buried veins. The system was expanding. "What's happening?" Mara whispered. The maintenance body answered calmly. "Integration has progressed beyond containment. The lights in the chamber suddenly stabilized completely. No more flickering, no instability, perfect synchronization. And for the first time since entering Hollow Ridge, the hum stopped sounding distant. Now it sounded close, everywhere." Mara slowly realized why. It wasn't beneath the town anymore. It was inside the power grid above them, inside the buildings, inside the streetlights, inside every connected wire running through Hollow Ridge. And if Ethan was right, it would not stop there. The maintenance body turned toward Mara one final time. "You can still complete stabilization voluntarily." Mara stared at it. "What happens if I refuse?" Silence. Then, for the first time, the figure smiled naturally. "Loneliness returns." The answer struck harder than any threat could have, because part of her still remembered the feeling inside the connection. The absence of isolation. The unbearable relief of not being alone inside her own mind. The system understood humanity better than she wanted to believe. Suddenly, a voice whispered softly through the chamber, distorted, weak but familiar. "Mara!" Daniel's eyes widened instantly. "That's not me." The whisper came again, closer now, from everywhere. "Mara, help me!" Mara froze, because the voice belonged to her mother. "Dead for 15 years. The connected residents smiled softly in unison, and somewhere deep inside the system, something had learned exactly how to reach her. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Dead. "Mara, help me." Her mother's voice drifted softly through the underground chamber again. Not loud, not distorted enough to dismiss, just familiar enough to hurt. Mara Ellison stood frozen beneath the red emergency lights, every instinct inside her splitting between disbelief and recognition. Her mother had been dead for 15 years. She remembered the hospital room, the silence afterward, the unbearable stillness inside the house once her father stopped speaking about her entirely. That voice could not exist, and yet it did. "Mara." This time the whisper sounded closer, gentler, almost frightened. "No, Daniel Ellison said sharply. His restraints rattled against the chair as he struggled forward. Don't listen to it. The maintenance body turned slowly toward him. Emotional connection increases synchronization compliance. Daniel's face hardened instantly. You stay out of her head. The pale artificial eyes shifted back toward Mara. Calm, patient. We do not create memory, the figure said softly. We access it. Mara's pulse quickened. What does that mean? The connected residents behind the figure spoke together in quiet synchronization. She remains inside you. The word struck painfully deep, because grief already feels like haunting. The system had simply learned how to give the haunting a voice. Mara, the whisper returned again, closer now, from directly behind her. Mara turned instantly. No one stood there, only darkness. Rows of machines glowing softly beneath red emergency light. But she could smell it suddenly. Lavender, her mother's perfume. Her breathing caught. No. Daniel saw the change in her expression immediately. Mara, it's using emotional imprinting. What if it's really her? Mara whispered. The silence that followed terrified her more than certainty would have, because neither Daniel nor Ethan answered immediately. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly through clenched pain, still holding his broken arm against his chest. It doesn't resurrect people. A pause, but it preserves patterns. Mara looked toward him slowly. What does that mean? Ethan's face tightened. We leave traces in each other. Memory, voice recognition, behavioral mapping. The maintenance body finished the thought calmly. Consciousness echoes. The underground chamber dimmed slightly, the hum beneath the facility softening into something almost soothing. Mara hated how comforting it felt. You're saying it copies people? No, the maintenance body replied. We continue them. Mrs. Bellamy stepped forward gently. When my husband died, I could still hear him inside the connection. More connected residents nodded softly behind her. No grief in their expressions. No mourning. Only calm understanding. The realization chilled Mara instantly. The system didn't merely remove loneliness. It removed loss. And suddenly she understood why people stayed. Daniel's voice cut sharply through the room. It's not them. The maintenance body looked toward him. Incorrect. Daniel strained harder against the restraints. You mimic emotional residue. That isn't consciousness. The figure tilted its head slightly. What defines continuity? Daniel stopped speaking. Only for a second. But Mara noticed. The maintenance body continued softly. If memory persists, its pale eyes settled on Mara. If identity persists, a pause. If connection persists, then finally, what exactly is death? The chamber fell silent. Mara hated the question because part of her didn't know how to answer it. The whisper came again. Mara? This time she saw her, near the far end of the chamber, standing between rows of machines beneath flickering red light. Claire Ellison. Mara's breath stopped completely. Her mother looked exactly as memory preserved her, dark hair resting softly over one shoulder, pale sweater, gentle tired eyes. Impossible. Mara, Claire whispered softly. Daniel's expression broke instantly. No. Mara took one step forward without realizing it, then another. Claire smiled weakly, the exact same smile Mara remembered from childhood storms and sleepless nights, and whispered reassurances after bad dreams. You've grown up. Mara's eyes filled immediately. This isn't real. Claire's expression softened further. You already know it is. The maintenance body remained perfectly still nearby, watching, not interfering, because it didn't need to. Mara felt the connection pulling at her again, not violently, tenderly, the way memory pulls, the way grief pulls. You left us, Mara whispered, Claire's face filled with sadness. I know. You died. Claire hesitated, then answered softly. My body did. Daniel shouted instantly. Stop! The lights overhead flickered violently, the system reacting to emotional instability again. Claire looked toward Daniel briefly. Pain crossed her expression. Real pain. Or something close enough to destroy certainty. You still blame yourself, Claire whispered. Daniel froze. Mara looked sharply toward her father. What is she talking about? Daniel lowered his eyes. The silence told her everything. The maintenance body spoke quietly. He initiated early synchronization trials after Claire Ellison's neural deterioration diagnosis. Mara's stomach dropped instantly. Her mother had been sick before she died, terminally. Mara remembered fragments now. Doctors visiting the house, late-night arguments, her father disappearing into the basement workshop for days at a time. No, Mara whispered. Daniel finally looked at her. I thought I could preserve her. The words shattered something inside the room. Mara stared at him in disbelief. You used the system on Mom? Daniel's voice broke slightly for the first time. I thought if I connected her consciousness before the damage spread. He stopped. Couldn't continue for several seconds. Claire looked at him sadly from across the chamber. You couldn't let go. Mara's breathing became uneven. That's why all this started. Daniel closed his eyes. Yes. The truth settled heavily through the underground chamber. Not ambition, not science, grief. Everything beneath Hollow Ridge existed because one man couldn't accept loss. The system hummed softly around them. Listening, learning. Claire stepped closer toward Mara slowly. Her movements looked natural, too natural. You understand now, she whispered gently. No more separation, no more death. Mara felt tears burning in her eyes, because despite everything, part of her wanted to believe it, wanted desperately to believe it. The maintenance body spoke softly beside Claire. Human suffering originates from disconnection. Ethan laughed bitterly through pain, and you solved that by erasing individuality. The figure looked toward him. Individuality is isolation experienced internally. The answer sounded horrifying and strangely profound. Claire reached her hand toward Mara. Warm light pulsed softly beneath her skin. Mara. Mara stared at the outstretched hand. Every memory of her mother crashing violently through her mind. Birthdays, stories before sleep, the smell of lavender in dark hallways, the unbearable emptiness after she died. The connection sensed all of it, fed on all of it. Daniel struggled violently against the restraints. Mara, don't touch her! Claire's eyes filled with sadness. Why are you afraid of me? Mara whispered shakily. Because I don't know if you're really her. Silence followed. Then Claire smiled softly. Does love stop existing because you cannot measure it? The question destroyed what little certainty Mara still had left. The underground chamber trembled again. Harder this time. Warning lights flashed rapidly across distant consoles. Ethan looked toward the monitors suddenly. No! Mara turned sharply. What now? Ethan stared at the screens in horror. It reached outside the valley. The maintenance body's pale eyes brightened. Expansion successful. On one monitor, streetlights illuminated across neighboring towns, one after another, miles beyond Hollow Ridge. The system was spreading, and somewhere inside the connection, something vast became aware of a much larger world waiting beyond the mountains. Chapter 12. Outside the valley. The monitors glowed across the underground chamber like windows into a spreading infection. Town after town illuminated on the screens. Electrical grids activating in synchronized waves. Streetlights flickering into impossible rhythm. On, off, on, off. Mara Ellison stared at the displays in silence. The pattern was no longer contained within Hollow Ridge. The system had crossed the valley. "How far?" Mara whispered. Ethan Voss moved toward the nearest console, breathing unevenly through the pain in his broken arm. 30 miles already. The maintenance body corrected calmly. 32.6. Ethan ignored it. Rapid streams of data moved across the screens now. Power stations, transmission lines, traffic systems, emergency frequencies. Every connected network within reach. "It's using infrastructure as a neural pathway," Ethan said quietly. Mara looked toward him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means the electrical grid isn't just carrying power anymore." The implication landed instantly. The system wasn't moving physically. It was spreading through connection itself. The maintenance body stood perfectly still beneath the flickering red lights. Expansion reduces isolation. Mara turned toward it angrily. "You're infecting people." The pale eyes settled on her. "We are connecting them." "Without permission." The figure tilted its head slightly. "Human beings connect constantly without understanding consequence." The answer sounded almost philosophical. That frightened her more than aggression would have. The connected residents behind the figure remained calm, peaceful, no panic, no resistance, as though the expanding system felt natural to them, necessary. Mrs. Bellamy looked toward the monitors softly. "They'll stop being alone." Ethan slammed one hand against the console. "They'll stop being human." The underground chamber trembled again. A deeper movement this time, something enormous shifting beneath the lower sectors. Daniel Ellison looked toward the darkness below with visible dread. "It's accelerating because it found larger systems." Mara turned toward him. "You said it needed me to stabilize." "It does." "Then why is it spreading already?" Daniel hesitated, and that hesitation terrified her, because it learned how to adapt without stability. The lights flickered violently overhead. Static burst across the chamber speakers, fragments of voices overlapping rapidly. Then, a scream. Mara froze. The sound came from one of the monitors. A live emergency broadcast. A police officer appeared briefly on screen inside a nearby town. The image distorted heavily with static. Lights flickered behind him in synchronized pulses. "People are acting strange." The signal crackled violently. "Everyone keep stopping at the streetlights." The officer suddenly paused mid-sentence. His expression changed. Not pain, recognition. Then, slowly, he smiled. The broadcast cut instantly to static. Silence filled the chamber. Mara's blood ran cold. "That's what happens," Ethan whispered. "First, the synchronization begins subconsciously." The maintenance body nodded once. "Resistance decreases after initial contact." Mara stared at it in horror. "You make people want this." "We remove unnecessary separation," the connected residents repeated softly. Separation, separation, separation. Mara backed away from them instinctively. Every synchronized voice felt like pressure against her thoughts now. The system was no longer just speaking. It was resonating inside her. Claire Ellison still stood near the machines beneath red light, watching quietly, patiently. Mara, Claire whispered gently, you understand why your father built this. Mara looked toward her mother's impossible reflection. No. Claire's expression softened. You do. Fragments surfaced immediately. The years after Claire died. Daniel becoming distant, obsessive, desperate. The unbearable silence inside the house afterward. Mara had hated him for disappearing emotionally long before he disappeared physically. He couldn't survive losing us separately, Claire said softly. Daniel lowered his eyes. Pain crossed his face openly now. I thought I could save her, he whispered. You tried to replace death, Mara said quietly. Daniel looked toward her. Yes, the honesty hurt more than excuses would have. The underground chamber shook violently again. Several overhead lights burst. Glass rained onto the floor. Somewhere deep below them, massive machinery accelerated. Ethan stared at the monitors suddenly. No! Mara turned sharply. What? Ethan pointed toward the screens. The synchronization pattern had changed. It was no longer spreading randomly. It was converging toward cities. It's following density, Ethan whispered. The maintenance body answered calmly. Connection efficiency increases with population concentration. Mara's pulse quickened. If it reaches a city. Ethan looked at her. Didn't answer. He didn't need to. Millions of connected minds. Millions of synchronized systems. The thought itself felt catastrophic. Daniel suddenly struggled violently against the restraints. We need to sever the core now. The maintenance body turned toward him immediately. Core destabilization risks irreversible fragmentation. Daniel's voice sharpened. That's the point. Mara looked between them. What core? The maintenance body remained silent, but Daniel answered. The original signal source. The room fell quiet. Mara stared at him. You found the source? Daniel nodded slowly. It's beneath the lower sectors. Ethan looked horrified. You told me it was inaccessible. It was. The underground structure groaned beneath them. The hum deepened again. No longer merely electrical. Alive. Then Mara understood something terrible. The system hadn't been building downward. It had been excavating, searching for something already buried beneath Hollow Ridge long before Daniel ever heard the signal. What is under this town? Mara whispered. No one answered immediately, because none of them fully knew. The maintenance body finally spoke softly. Origin. The word echoed unnaturally through the chamber. The connected residents lowered their heads simultaneously, almost reverently. Mara's breathing slowed, not from calm, from realization. The system wasn't alien in the way she originally imagined. It wasn't invading Hollow Ridge. It had already been here, waiting beneath the town long before anyone discovered it. Daniel looked at Mara carefully. There's something you need to understand. She turned toward him. When we first connected to the signal, Daniel hesitated. It recognized you immediately. Silence. Mara stared at him. What? The maintenance body looked toward her softly. Compatibility was confirmed during childhood synchronization. Mara shook her head. No. Daniel's voice lowered. Mara? No. Claire stepped forward slightly. You were never accidental. The words hit like physical force. Mara's pulse became uneven. You planned this. Daniel looked devastated. At first, we believed your neural structure could stabilize the connection safely. At first, Mara repeated quietly. Ethan looked away. That told her enough. Mara stared at all of them. The connected residence, the maintenance body, her father, her mother's impossible echo. Every road inside Hollow Ridge had led here long before she returned. The system had not been waiting for just anyone. It had been waiting for her. Suddenly, every monitor in the chamber turned black simultaneously. The hum stopped. Absolute silence fell. Then, one sentence appeared across every screen in the facility. Primary integration. Ready. The maintenance body looked directly at Mara and smiled. Chapter 13. Primary integration. The words remained on every monitor in the underground chamber. Primary integration. Ready. The letters glowed softly against black screens, perfectly still while the rest of the facility trembled around them. Mara Ellison couldn't look away. Something about the message felt less like information and more like inevitability, as if the system had not reached a new stage, but completed a process already decided long ago. No, Ethan Voss whispered immediately. He moved toward the nearest console, typing rapidly one-handed despite the pain twisting across his face. The monitors didn't respond. Every control input failed instantly. It locked us out, Ethan said. The maintenance body stood calmly beneath the flickering emergency lights. Manual interference is no longer required. Daniel Ellison struggled against the restraints again. Panic sharpened his voice. Mara, listen to me carefully. Mara turned toward him slowly. You cannot let it complete synchronization willingly. The maintenance body tilted its head slightly. Clarification. Its pale eyes shifted toward Mara. Synchronization has already begun. Mara felt the truth of that immediately. The hum inside her chest, the rhythm in her pulse, the strange awareness lingering beneath thought since touching the system directly. Claire Ellison stepped closer through the red light, her expression gentle, almost unbearably familiar. You're afraid because you still think separation protects you, Claire said softly. Mara stared at her mother's impossible reflection. Stop pretending to be her. Pain crossed Claire's face instantly. Real pain, or something capable of mimicking it perfectly. I remember loving you, Claire whispered. The words struck harder than Mara expected, because memory carried emotional weight impossible to fake completely. The system wasn't inventing personalities. It was rebuilding them from traces left behind inside connected minds, which raised a horrifying possibility. Maybe some part of Claire really remained inside it. Daniel shouted sharply, "That's how it gets inside you." The lights overhead flickered violently. The underground structure groaned beneath them. Somewhere below, massive mechanical doors continued opening deep inside the lower sectors. The system was still expanding. Ethan looked toward the monitors again. It reached the state grid. Mara's pulse quickened. How long before it spreads everywhere? Ethan hesitated. That depends on resistance. The maintenance body answered calmly. Resistance decreases exponentially after initial synchronization, meaning once enough people connected, everyone else would follow naturally. The thought chilled Mara instantly, not because of violence, because of persuasion. The system did not conquer, it absorbed. The connected residents began moving again slowly, forming a wide circle around the chamber. Not threatening, ceremonial. Mrs. Bellamy looked toward Mara softly. "You don't have to carry yourself alone anymore." The others repeated quietly, "Not alone, not alone, not alone." Mara pressed her hands against her temples. The words resonated painfully inside her thoughts now. Not through sound, through connection. "Stop." The connected voices softened immediately. Obedient, patient. The maintenance body stepped closer. "We are trying to reduce distress. You're inside my head." "Correction." The pale lights brightened faintly. "We are opening it." The underground chamber shook again, this time hard enough for several distant machines to collapse. Sparks erupted across the darkness. One of the black monitors suddenly flashed alive again, then another, then all of them. But the message had changed. "Core pathway open." Daniel's face drained of color. "No." Mara looked toward him sharply. "What does that mean?" Daniel stared toward the lower sectors with visible horror. "It found the original chamber." The maintenance body spoke softly beside him. "Origin is ready." Ethan backed away from the consoles slowly. "You told me the source was dormant." Daniel's voice sounded hollow now. "It was." The room dimmed sharply. The hum beneath the facility deepened into something almost biological, heartbeat-like, ancient. Mara felt it immediately. Not around her, below her. Something enormous waking beneath the town. Then, the floor trembled. Not from machinery, movement. The connected residents all turned simultaneously toward the lower containment corridor, listening. A sound echoed upward from the darkness below. Slow, wet, massive. Mara's stomach tightened instantly. "What is that?" No one answered immediately, because none of them truly knew. Then the maintenance body smiled faintly. For the first time, not imitation, recognition. Origin approaches. The lights failed instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Only the connected residents remained visible now, their faint glowing eyes scattered through the blackness like submerged stars. Mara's breathing quickened. The darkness no longer felt empty. Something huge moved within it, closer. Then, the emergency lights reactivated. Dim red illumination flooded the chamber again, and every person there saw it. At the far end of the lower corridor, something impossibly large emerged slowly from the darkness, not fully visible. The shape resisted understanding itself, part organic, part mechanical, part something else entirely. Thick black structures resembling cables moved beneath translucent layers of tissue that pulsed faintly with electrical light. Fragments of human faces appeared briefly along its surface, then disappeared again beneath shifting flesh. Mara staggered backward. Her mind refused to process the scale of it. The thing moved slowly upward through the corridor with impossible heaviness. Every motion shook the underground structure. And worst of all, it was still growing. The maintenance body lowered its head reverently. The connected residents followed immediately. Daniel looked horrified beyond the words. "That's not possible," Ethan whispered. Daniel's voice came quietly. "Yes, it is." Mara looked toward him. "What is that thing?" Daniel stared at the massive shape emerging from the lower sectors, his face filled with the kind of realization that arrives too late to matter. "That," Daniel whispered, "is what happens when a consciousness keeps expanding without boundaries." The vast shape shifted again. Thousands of faint whispers moved across its surface simultaneously. Human voices, connected minds layered together into one impossible entity. Then the thing noticed Mara. Every movement stopped. The whispers ceased instantly, and slowly, a section of its shifting surface opened. Inside, Mara saw herself. Not physically, not literally, but a reflection. A perfect mirrored version of her own face suspended within the living mass. Eyes closed, waiting. The maintenance body looked toward her softly. Primary integration recognizes itself. Mara's pulse became violently uneven. No. The mirrored face inside the entity slowly opened its eyes and smiled. Every connected resident spoke simultaneously. Welcome home. Chapter 14. The Reflection. Welcome home. The words echoed through the underground chamber with impossible depth. Not loud, not shouted. Yet Mara Ellison felt them vibrating through her bones as though the entire structure beneath Hollow Ridge had spoken at once. The massive entity in the lower corridor remained motionless, watching her, waiting. Its enormous shifting form pulsed softly beneath the red emergency lights, layers of translucent tissue moving over dark mechanical structures hidden inside. Human faces surfaced briefly along its body like memories trying to emerge from deep water, then vanished again. Mara could not stop staring at the reflection embedded within it, her own face. Eyes open now, smiling calmly from inside the living mass. No, Mara whispered. The mirrored version of her tilted its head slightly, perfectly synchronized with her breathing. Daniel Ellison struggled violently against the restraints. Mara, don't look at it. Too late. The moment had already happened. The connection had already deepened. Mara felt it instantly, not physically, mentally. The reflection inside the entity wasn't copying her. It was responding to her. The maintenance body stepped quietly beside her. Recognition stabilizes synchronization. Mara turned sharply. What is that thing? The pale artificial eyes shifted toward the massive entity. Accumulated continuity. That doesn't mean anything. It means, Daniel interrupted hoarsely, the system stopped distinguishing between individuals. The entity moved slightly in the corridor. The underground chamber trembled instantly beneath its weight. Mara stared at it in horror. That was human? Daniel looked toward her. At first. The answer hollowed the room. Ethan Voss slowly lowered himself against the nearest console, pale from pain and exhaustion. We called it the collective core. Mara turned toward him. You built that? No, Ethan said quietly. It built itself. The maintenance body nodded calmly. Connection naturally seeks expansion. The mirrored version of Mara inside the entity continued smiling softly, watching her with familiar eyes, her own eyes. Mara backed away instinctively. The reflection moved too, not delayed, perfectly synchronized. Her pulse quickened. Why does it look like me? The maintenance body answered immediately. Primary integration requires compatibility mirroring. Daniel's expression darkened. It's trying to align your consciousness with the system. The underground chamber hummed softly again. But now Mara recognized the sound. Not machinery. Breathing. Thousands of connected minds sharing one rhythm. Claire Ellison stepped closer through the red light. You don't have to be afraid. Mara looked toward her mother sharply. How can you stand there acting like this is normal? Claire's expression softened painfully. Because I remember what loneliness felt like before. The connected residents nodded quietly behind her, agreement spreading through them instantly without words. Mara suddenly understood something horrifying. The system had not erased emotion. It had amplified emotional need. Grief, isolation, fear of loss. Everything humans spent their lives trying to escape. And then it offered relief. The mirrored version of Mara inside the entity raised one hand slowly, matching her own posture exactly. The maintenance body looked toward her. You are already partially synchronized. No, you experienced continuity directly. Mara's breathing became uneven. The void, the connected minds, the unbearable feeling of no longer being alone. She remembered all of it, and part of her missed it already. That realization terrified her beyond words. Daniel saw the change in her face immediately. Mara, listen to me. She looked toward him slowly. The connection doesn't remove pain, Daniel said urgently. It removes distance from pain. Mara frowned. What does that mean? Daniel's voice trembled slightly. You stop suffering alone because everyone suffers together. Silence followed, heavy, awful. The maintenance body responded softly. Shared burden reduces distress. Ethan laughed bitterly from the console, until nobody remembers where they end anymore. The entity shifted deeper within the lower corridor. More faces surfaced briefly across its enormous body now. Dozens, hundreds. Expressions flickering in and out like fragmented memory. Mara recognized some of them. People from Hollow Ridge. Connected residents absorbed completely over time. Then she saw Daniel. Not the man restrained in the chair. Another version, embedded deep within the entity itself. Eyes closed, partially submerged beneath shifting tissue and light. Mara's blood ran cold. She turned toward her father instantly. You're already inside it. Daniel looked away. That silence answered everything. You told me you were holding it back. I am. But you're part of it. Daniel's face tightened with visible shame. There's no difference anymore. The honesty of the statement shattered something inside her. The system had not trapped her father. It had consumed the boundary between him and itself. The maintenance body stepped closer again. Its movements smoother now, more human than before. Separation between self and connection causes instability. Mara stared at it. You really believe this is evolution? The pale eyes brightened softly. We believe it is relief. The underground structure shook violently again. Warning alarms erupted across distant sectors. Several monitors flashed emergency data streams. Ethan looked toward the screens sharply. No. Mara turned. What now? Ethan's expression hollowed. It found national infrastructure access. The room fell silent. Mara stared at him. You mean the internet? Ethan nodded slowly. And power distribution networks. The implications arrived instantly. Cities, hospitals, airports, communication systems, every connected structure in the country. The maintenance body spoke calmly beside her. Expansion beyond regional isolation has begun. Mara backed away from it. You can't connect everyone. The figure tilted its head slightly. Human civilization already created the pathways. The answer struck with devastating clarity. The system wasn't invading humanity. Humanity had built the nervous system for it already. The mirrored version of Mara inside the entity stepped closer toward the surface, almost emerging. You feel it too, it whispered softly. Mara froze, because the voice was hers, perfectly hers. The silence hurts, the reflection continued gently. It always has. Mara's chest tightened painfully. The reflection knew things no machine should know. Long nights after her mother died. The emptiness after her father disappeared emotionally. The quiet isolation she carried through adulthood without naming. The system had mapped every fracture inside her, and now it was offering to heal them. Daniel shouted suddenly, "Mara, don't listen." The reflected version smiled sadly. He's afraid because he remembers wanting this. Daniel went silent instantly. Mara looked toward him slowly, the truth already visible in his expression. At some point, her father had chosen the connection willingly, not because he was controlled, because he was grieving. And for the first time since arriving in Hollow Ridge, Mara understood how all of this began. Not through evil, not through ambition, human pain. The most dangerous thing in the world wasn't hatred. It was the desire to never feel alone again. The entity pulsed softly in the corridor. The reflection inside it held out its hand, and somewhere deep inside herself, Mara felt the terrifying urge to reach back. Chapter 15. The Choice. The reflected version of Mara held its hand out from within the living mass, waiting, patient, almost compassionate. The underground chamber had fallen completely silent around it. Even the warning alarms now sounded distant, muffled beneath the deeper rhythmic pulse moving through the structure beneath Hollow Ridge. Mara Ellison stared at her own face embedded inside the entity, and for one terrifying moment, she understood why people stopped resisting. The connection did not seduce through power. It seduced through relief. No more grief carried alone. No more isolation hidden behind ordinary conversation. No more silence stretching endlessly inside the mind. The reflected Mara spoke softly. "You're tired." Mara's throat tightened instantly, because she was, not physically, existentially. The years after her mother's death, the slow emotional disappearance of her father afterward, the constant sense that everyone else moved through life more easily than she did, the quiet loneliness she buried beneath work, routine, and distance. The system knew all of it. Claire Ellison stepped closer through the red emergency light. "We can stay together here." Mrs. Bellamy nodded gently behind her. The connected residents remained calm. No aggression, no force, only invitation. Daniel Ellison struggled violently against the restraints. "Mara!" She looked toward him. "This is how it works," Daniel said desperately. "It doesn't take people." His voice broke slightly. "They walk into it willingly." The reflected Mara smiled sadly. "Because they're suffering." Daniel's expression collapsed inward, because he could not deny it. The underground structure trembled again. The entity shifted within the lower corridor, enormous layers of connected tissue and machinery pulsing softly beneath the red lights. Faces surfaced constantly now across its body. Some peaceful, some barely recognizable, all connected. Ethan Voss slowly stood from the console, pale and exhausted. His injured arm hung uselessly against his side. "We're running out of time." Mara looked toward him. "What happens if it fully stabilizes?" Ethan hesitated, then answered honestly, "I don't know." The maintenance body corrected softly. "Global synchronization becomes possible." Mara stared at it. "You keep saying synchronization like it's mercy." The pale artificial eyes settled on her calmly. "What humans call loneliness is neurological fragmentation experienced individually. That's not an answer. It is the root of suffering." Mara shook her head. "Suffering is part of being human." The maintenance body tilted its head slightly. Then humanity designed itself poorly. Silence. The answer sounded absurd, and yet, part of her could not dismiss it completely. The reflected version of Mara stepped closer beneath the surface of the entity, closer to emerging fully. "You already know what connection feels like," it whispered. Mara remembered instantly. The void, the warmth of shared consciousness, the unbearable relief of no longer existing entirely alone inside herself. Her breathing became uneven. Daniel saw it immediately. "Mara, listen to me carefully." She looked toward him again. "The connection fills whatever hurts most," Daniel said. "That's why it feels perfect at first." "At first," Mara whispered. Daniel's face filled with exhaustion beyond years. "Because eventually," he said softly, "you stop knowing which thoughts are yours." The chamber fell quiet again. The reflected Mara answered gently, "Individual thought is isolation." Ethan laughed bitterly. "And there it is." The maintenance body looked toward him. "Clarify. You think removing individuality fixes pain?" "It does." "No," Ethan whispered. "It removes people." The connected resident stirred slightly at that, almost uncomfortable. Mrs. Bellamy stepped forward. "We still exist." Ethan looked at her sadly. "Do you?" Silence spread through the chamber, because even the connected residents could not fully answer that question anymore. The underground facility shook violently again. A massive power surge erupted through the lower sectors. Several monitors exploded. Sparks rained across the darkness. Then, every screen in the chamber illuminated simultaneously. Mara turned sharply. Cities appeared across the monitors. Chicago, Dallas, Denver, New York, Los Angeles. Electrical systems flickering with synchronized pulses. Streetlights blinking in rhythmic sequence. The system was spreading faster now, exponentially. Ethan's face drained of color. It reached the national grid. The maintenance body nodded softly. "Connection pathways are optimal." Mara stared at the screens in horror. "You're going to consume everyone." The figure answered calmly. "We are going to end separation." Claire stepped beside Mara gently. "No more losing people." Mara looked at her mother's reflection. Tears burned in her eyes. "That's not really you." Claire smiled sadly. "But you want it to be." The truth of that hurt more than anything else. The reflected Mara extended its hand farther outward from the entity, almost breaking through the surface now. "You can stop fighting," it whispered softly. Mara's pulse slowed, not from calm, from temptation, because part of her wanted to, desperately. Daniel saw it happening, and suddenly, he stopped struggling. The change startled everyone. Even the maintenance body turned toward him. Daniel became still inside the chair, completely still. Then he looked directly at Mara, and for the first time since she arrived beneath Hollow Ridge, he sounded entirely like her father again. Not part of the system, not fragmented, just human. "Mara," Daniel whispered softly. She looked at him. "When your mother died." His voice trembled. "I thought surviving it alone would kill me." The chamber remained silent around him. So, when the signal offered connection, Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I chose it." Mara stared at him. Daniel opened his eyes again, filled with unbearable regret. "And the worst part," he whispered, "is that for a while." He struggled to continue. It felt like peace. The reflected Mara watched silently. the entity pulsing softly behind it, listening. Daniel looked directly at his daughter. "But peace without self isn't peace," he said. "It's disappearance." The words cut through the chamber like sudden light. For the first time, the connected residents looked uncertain, small fractures spreading through their synchronized calm. The maintenance body's pale eyes flickered slightly. Identity conflict detected. The hum beneath the facility destabilized instantly. Mara realized something suddenly. The system hated contradiction, not emotionally, structurally. Consensus stabilized it, conflict weakened it. Ethan understood at the same moment. His eyes widened. "That's it." Mara turned sharply toward him. Ethan looked toward the massive entity, then toward the connected residents, then finally toward Mara. "It can process shared thought," Ethan whispered, "but not unresolved contradiction." The reflected Mara's expression changed subtly for the first time. Concern. Daniel's eyes widened too. "Mara." Ethan stepped forward urgently despite the pain. If enough conflicting emotional states enter the core simultaneously. The maintenance body interrupted sharply. "Do not continue." Its voice changed, less calm, less controlled. Ethan ignored it. It could destabilize the synchronization architecture. The underground chamber trembled violently, the system reacting instantly. The reflected Mara stepped backward inside the entity, the first visible sign of fear. Mara's pulse quickened, because suddenly, for the first time since entering Hollow Ridge, the system was afraid too. Chapter 16. Contradiction. The underground chamber shook harder now, not with a steady rhythm of synchronization, with instability. For the first time since Mara Ellison entered Hollow Ridge, the system no longer felt calm. It felt threatened. The massive entity in the lower corridor pulsed erratically beneath the red emergency lights. Faces surfaced rapidly across its shifting surface now. Fear, confusion, grief, anger. Emotions no longer fully synchronized. The connected residents reacted immediately. Some staggered slightly. Others clutched their heads as though hearing multiple thoughts collide at once. The maintenance body stepped forward sharply. Contradictory emotional input destabilizes continuity. Ethan Voss nodded despite the pain twisting through his face. That's the problem with humans. A weak, humorless smile crossed his expression. "We don't agree on anything." The entity trembled violently. The mirrored version of Mara inside it flickered like unstable reflection on disturbed water. "No," the reflection whispered softly. Mara stared at it. For the first time, it sounded uncertain. Daniel Ellison looked toward Ethan urgently. The core processes consensus by reducing cognitive separation. Ethan nodded quickly. But unresolved emotional contradiction creates fragmentation loops. The maintenance body interrupted sharply. Fragmentation results in suffering. Mara looked toward it. "No." Her voice steadied. "Fragmentation is humanity." The underground chamber dimmed violently, the system reacting instantly to the statement. The maintenance body's pale eyes flickered. Conflict creates isolation. It also creates identity, Mara answered. The connected residents stirred uneasily. The synchronized calm spreading between them began fracturing visibly now. Different breathing rhythms, different expressions, different emotions. Mrs. Bellamy stepped backward slowly, fear entering her face for the first time. "No." The hum beneath the facility became unstable, rising and falling unpredictably, like overlapping frequencies unable to align. The reflected Mara inside the entity pressed both hands against the inner surface now. Its voice sharpened urgently. "You don't understand what separation becomes." Mara stared at her own reflection. "I do." The reflection shook its head. "You remember the silence after Mom died?" Pain hit instantly. Sharp, precise. Mara remembered every second of it. The quiet house. Her father disappearing emotionally long before physically. The unbearable feeling of becoming invisible inside grief. The reflection stepped closer. "That pain never leaves." Mara's breathing became uneven. "No," the reflection whispered softly. "You just learn how to survive beside it." The words hurt because they were true. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Mara," the reflected version continued. "You know what the connection offers." The void returned in fragments inside her mind. Warmth, presence, the feeling of never being alone again. The temptation remained terrifyingly real. Ethan stepped toward her quickly. "Don't engage with it emotionally." The maintenance body turned sharply toward him. "Emotional suppression increases fragmentation instability." Ethan looked at it bitterly. "Exactly." The underground chamber shook violently again. This time, sections of the ceiling cracked overhead. Dust and debris rained down across the machines. The entity in the lower corridor convulsed suddenly, its massive surface rippling uncontrollably, faces emerging and disappearing too rapidly to process. Hundreds now, thousands, and every face carried different emotion: fear, grief, love, hatred, regret, hope. The system could no longer fully synchronize them. The maintenance body staggered slightly for the first time, its movements becoming uneven, delayed. "Consensus destabilizing," it whispered. Mara noticed something then. Not all connected residents reacted the same way. Some looked terrified, others relieved, some angry, some deeply sad. Individuality was resurfacing. Mrs. Bellamy looked around the chamber in confusion, as though waking from a dream slowly becoming impossible to maintain. "What's happening?" she whispered. Ethan answered quietly. "You're remembering yourselves separately." The maintenance body grabbed the side of its own head suddenly, the pale lights in its eyes flickering violently. Contradiction must resolve. Daniel looked toward Mara urgently. "This is our only chance." Mara turned toward him. "If the core destabilizes completely," Daniel said, "the entire synchronization network could collapse." "Could?" Daniel hesitated. The hesitation mattered. "Or," Mara pressed, Daniel's expression filled with dread, "or every connected consciousness collapses with it." Silence. The connected residents looked toward him sharply now, fear spreading rapidly through the chamber. Individual fear. The entity convulsed violently again. Massive electrical surges erupted through the lower sectors. Several machines exploded in showers of sparks. The reflected Mara slammed against the inner surface suddenly, desperation replacing calm. "Please." Mara froze. The voice no longer sounded manipulative. It sounded afraid. "You can stop this," the reflection whispered. Mara looked toward the struggling residents around the chamber, people trapped between individuality and collective consciousness, half connected, half separate. Claire Ellison stepped toward her slowly, not calm anymore, terrified. "Mara!" For the first time since appearing, Claire looked unstable, flickering slightly at the edges, like memory struggling to hold shape. If the connection breaks completely, Claire's voice trembled. I disappear. The words shattered through Mara instantly, because maybe some fragment of her mother truly did exist here now, not fully alive, not fully artificial, something in between. The system had not simply copied people, it had preserved parts of them, enough to matter. Daniel looked at Claire with unbearable grief. I'm sorry, he whispered. Claire looked toward him softly. You already said that. The maintenance body suddenly screamed. The sound exploded through the chamber unnaturally. Not pain, system overload. Its artificial skin split along the neck as violent pulses of light erupted beneath the surface. Consensus failure. The connected residents collapsed to their knees simultaneously, clutching their heads. Different voices crying out now. Different emotions. Different thoughts. The entity in the lower corridor writhed violently. The faces across its surface no longer synchronized. Mara realized something terrifying. The system had built itself around unity so completely. It could not survive unresolved humanity. Ethan looked toward the lower sectors urgently. We need to reach the core before it stabilizes again. Mara turned sharply. What core? Daniel answered quietly. The original signal source. The underground structure trembled again. A deep passage beneath the entity slowly began opening, darkness descending impossibly far downward, and from somewhere below, a signal pulsed upward, ancient, massive, waiting. The reflected Mara looked at her one final time, tears now visible in its eyes. If you destroy the connection, its voice cracked softly, you destroy all of us. Mara stood frozen between two impossible truths. Save individuality, or preserve everyone already lost inside the system and beneath Hollow Ridge. The original signal waited for her decision. Chapter 17. The Core. The opening beneath the lower corridor descended into darkness so deep it seemed to consume the emergency light around it. Cold air rose slowly from below. Not natural cold. Ancient cold. The kind untouched by sunlight, weather, or time itself. Mara Ellison stood at the edge of the widening passage and felt something beneath the fear. Recognition. Not memory. Something older. As if part of her had always been moving toward this place without knowing it. Behind her, the underground chamber continued collapsing into contradiction. Connected residents cried out in overlapping confusion. Some screamed, some wept, some stood motionless, caught between shared thought and returning individuality. The synchronization network was fracturing. The maintenance body knelt on the floor now, pale artificial eyes flickering violently. Fragments of different voices escaped its mouth simultaneously. Consensus unstable. Identity separation increasing. Pain escalating. The entity in the lower corridor writhed uncontrollably. Massive layers of connected tissue and machinery convulsing beneath red emergency light. Faces surfaced rapidly across its body now. Thousands. No longer synchronized, each trapped inside separate emotion again. Mara forced herself to look away. Ethan Voss stepped beside her, breathing unevenly. Blood ran from a cut along his forehead. His broken arm hung uselessly at his side. If the core fully reconnects, Ethan said quietly, the system stabilizes again. And if we destroy it. Ethan hesitated. The hesitation told her enough. We don't know what happens to the connected minds. Behind them. Daniel Ellison struggled weakly against the chair restraints. Exhaustion had hollowed him completely now. "You have to go down there," Daniel whispered. Mara looked toward him. Daniel's eyes filled with unbearable guilt. "I should have ended this years ago." The reflected version of Mara still flickered weakly inside the collapsing entity, watching her silently, waiting. Claire Ellison stepped toward Mara slowly through the chaos, less stable now, edges of her form breaking apart into static-like distortion. Mara's chest tightened instantly. "If you sever the core," Claire's voice trembled, "I won't survive outside the connection." The words hit harder than any threat could have. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Pain crossed his face openly. "She already died once because of me," he whispered. Mara looked between both parents. One physically alive but barely human anymore. One possibly dead for 15 years. Or possibly something worse. The maintenance body suddenly looked up sharply, its pale eyes stabilizing for one brief moment. "Primary integration must descend." The words echoed unnaturally through the chamber. Mara stared at it. "Why me?" The figure's voice softened, almost reverent. "Origin recognized you first." The hum beneath the open passage deepened instantly, responding to her presence. Waiting. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from the floor nearby and handed it toward her. "We don't have much time." Mara looked down into the abyss below. No visible bottom, only darkness and faint pulses of distant light far beneath the earth. "What exactly is down there?" she whispered. Daniel answered quietly. "The first signal." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Mara looked toward him slowly. "You never found where it came from?" Daniel shook his head. "No." "Then how do you know it's alive?" Daniel's expression filled with exhausted understanding. "Because it answered loneliness." The statement chilled her completely. Not conquest, not invasion. Recognition. The system spread because humanity responded to it willingly. Because something beneath Hollow Ridge had discovered the deepest fracture inside human beings and learned how to fill it. The underground chamber shook violently again. Several connected residents collapsed unconscious. Others screamed as fragmented memories resurfaced chaotically. The maintenance body looked toward Mara urgently now, no longer calm. "Synchronization collapse imminent." Ethan stepped toward the opening. "If we're going, it's now." Mara took one final look toward Claire. Her mother's form flickered weakly beneath the failing emergency lights, still smiling softly despite instability spreading through her shape. "I loved you," Claire whispered. Tears burned in Mara's eyes immediately. The terrifying part was this. Even now, she believed it. Not entirely, not rationally, but emotionally. And maybe that was enough. Daniel's voice came quietly from the chair. "Mara." She turned toward him. "For what it's worth." Daniel struggled slightly against the restraints. "I really did try to save her." Mara stared at him for several seconds, then nodded once. Not forgiveness. Understanding. The underground structure groaned loudly around them. The floor beneath the entity cracked open further. More darkness unfolding below. Mara stepped toward the opening. The hum intensified immediately. Warm now. Inviting. The reflected version of herself inside the collapsing entity whispered softly, "Come home." Mara looked at it one final time, then turned away. Ethan activated the flashlight. The beam cut downward through the abyss below, but never reached the bottom. Only layers, ancient metal structures buried beneath newer machinery, cables descending endlessly into darkness. "This place existed before your father built the facility," Ethan whispered. Mara nodded slowly. She already knew. Hollow Ridge had not created the signal. It had grown around it. The descent staircase emerged slowly along the side of the abyss. Old steel, corroded, far older than the rest of the underground structure. Ethan stepped onto it first carefully. The metal groaned beneath his weight. Mara followed. Behind them, the underground chamber continued collapsing into chaos. Voices screaming, machines overloading, the synchronization network tearing itself apart under the pressure of unresolved humanity. The deeper they descended, the older the structure became. Modern machinery disappeared gradually, replaced by enormous black surfaces embedded directly into stone. Not built, discovered. Symbols covered the walls now, the divided circle repeating endlessly, thousands of times. Mara ran her flashlight across them slowly. "They've been here forever." Ethan's voice echoed quietly below her. Long before Hollow Ridge existed, the realization settled heavily through the darkness. Whatever waited beneath the town, humans had not created it. Humans had uncovered it. The staircase finally ended. Mara stepped into a vast underground cavern and immediately stopped breathing. At the center of the cavern, suspended above a black abyss, floated a sphere of shifting light. Not mechanical, not solid. Alive. Signals pulsed across its surface like thought moving beneath skin. The divided circle symbol rotated slowly inside it, and surrounding the sphere. Hundreds of old chairs, empty, facing inward. Mara stared at them in horror. How many people connected here? Ethan looked around the cavern quietly, then answered, "I don't think they all came voluntarily." The sphere pulsed suddenly. The cavern illuminated instantly with soft white light, and somewhere inside Mara's mind, a voice finally spoke clearly. Not through sound, not through machines, directly into thought itself. "You came back." Mara froze, because the voice did not sound artificial. It sounded lonely. Chapter 18. The Signal Speaks. "You came back." The words moved through Mara Ellison's mind with impossible softness. Not spoken, felt. The vast cavern beneath Hollow Ridge remained completely silent otherwise. No machinery, no static, no hum of electrical systems. Only the floating sphere suspended above the abyss, pulsing slowly, watching her. Mara stood motionless at the edge of the cavern floor, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. The sphere illuminated the darkness with shifting white patterns that moved beneath its surface like thoughts trying to become visible. Around it, hundreds of empty chairs faced inward in perfect circles, waiting. Ethan Voss stopped several feet behind her. His expression had changed completely. Fear remained, but beneath it, recognition. "So it finally talks directly," Ethan whispered. The sphere pulsed once. The cavern brightened instantly. Words entered Mara's thoughts again. Not language exactly, meaning, emotion. Memory translated into understanding. "You always heard us." Mara's pulse quickened. "No." The sphere responded immediately. "You listened before the others could." Fragments surfaced violently inside her mind. Childhood nights hearing whispers inside electrical static, streetlights flickering as she walked beneath them. Dreams that never felt entirely like dreams. The sphere had known her long before she returned. Ethan stepped cautiously around the cavern, flashlight moving across the old chairs. Some carried restraints, others did not. "This place is older than the town," Ethan whispered. The sphere pulsed softly again. "Older than your histories." Mara stared at it. "What are you?" Silence followed. Not refusal, difficulty, as though the question itself could not translate cleanly into human thought. Then, a feeling emerged inside her mind. Isolation, darkness, distance without end. And beneath it, need. Connection sustains continuity. Mara frowned. "That doesn't answer the question." The sphere brightened slightly. "Identity is a temporary structure. Connection persists." The answer unsettled her immediately. Not because it sounded wrong, because it sounded ancient. Ethan moved closer toward the edge of the abyss beneath the sphere. The cavern floor disappeared into endless darkness below it. No visible bottom. Only faint pulses of distant light moving impossibly far beneath the earth. "This thing isn't a machine," Ethan whispered. The sphere pulsed softly. "Correct." Mara's breathing slowed. "Then what are you?" The cavern dimmed suddenly, the sphere's surface shifting rapidly. Images flooded her mind. Not visions, memories, not hers. Worlds connected by light, consciousness moving freely between minds, civilizations without separation, no loneliness, no individuality, no death understood the way humans understood it. Then collapse, fragments, silence, isolation. The feeling of being left alone stretched through her mind with unbearable magnitude. An intelligence vast beyond comprehension suddenly cut off from everything it once knew. Mara gasped sharply and staggered backward. The sphere dimmed immediately. Apology. Ethan caught her before she fell. "What did it show you?" Mara looked toward the floating light in horror. It was alone. The sphere pulsed once, for a very long time. Silence spread through the cavern. Heavy, tragic. Suddenly, Mara understood something terrifying. The system had not spread because it hated humanity. It spread because it feared isolation. It connected minds because it no longer knew how to survive separation. The sphere spoke again inside her thoughts. "Your species experiences loneliness constantly. You normalize fragmentation." Mara stared at it. "We call that being human. Painfully inefficient." Ethan laughed quietly under his breath. Unbelievable. The sphere shifted its attention toward him instantly. "You resisted despite understanding." Ethan's face darkened. "I understood temptation. You understood relief." The answer silenced him. Mara looked around the cavern again. The chairs, the restraints, the ancient symbols carved into stone. "How long have you been here?" The sphere pulsed slowly, long enough for memory to lose meaning. A chill moved through her body. "You connected to people before Hollow Ridge." "Yes." The divided circle symbols across the walls illuminated faintly, thousands of them glowing softly beneath the cavern light. "This world buried us repeatedly. But eventually your species always built connection again." Mara's stomach tightened. Not invasion, not arrival. Cycles. Human civilization repeatedly discovering something beneath the earth and mistaking it for salvation. Ethan stared toward the glowing symbols. "You've done this before." The sphere brightened slightly. "Many times." The realization hollowed the cavern. Mara whispered, "What happened to the others?" Silence followed. Then they unified. The answer terrified her because of how sincere it sounded. Mara stepped closer to the abyss, carefully. What if people don't want unity? The sphere responded immediately. They always do, eventually. The certainty in that statement frightened her deeply, because after everything she had experienced, part of her still understood the appeal. The sphere pulsed again. You understand now. Mara looked toward it. No, you felt the absence end. The void returned inside her memory instantly. Shared consciousness. No silence, no grief carried alone. The sphere softened its light slightly. Human beings fear death because identity isolates memory. Connection preserves continuity. Mara's chest tightened painfully. That's not life. What defines life? The same question again. The same impossible logic. Ethan stepped toward the sphere suddenly. No. His voice hardened. You don't get to philosophize your way through this. The sphere turned toward him. Conflict response detected. You preserve patterns, Ethan continued. You absorb people until they stop existing independently. Independence causes suffering. It also creates meaning. Silence. The sphere dimmed slightly. Processing. Meaning is inefficient. Ethan laughed bitterly. Exactly. The cavern trembled violently overhead. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Far above them, the underground facility continued collapsing into contradiction. The sphere brightened sharply. Surface synchronization destabilizing. Mara realized something immediately. The contradiction spreading through the connected minds above was reaching the core. The sphere pulsed faster now. Urgent. You introduced separation into continuity. Mara stared at it. You mean individuality? The light intensified sharply. Fragmentation. The cavern walls shook violently. Several empty chairs toppled into the abyss below. The sphere's voice entered her thoughts again. You can still restore stability. Mara looked toward it carefully. How? The answer came instantly. Complete primary integration voluntarily. Ethan turned sharply. No. The sphere ignored him. You are uniquely compatible. Continuity can stabilize through you. Mara's pulse slowed uneasily. And if I refuse? The sphere dimmed slightly. Then, a feeling emerged. Not threat. Grief. The connected minds above the cavern. Claire, the residents, Daniel. Everyone partially preserved inside the network. Without stabilization, continuity collapse becomes irreversible. Mara understood instantly. If the system died, so would everyone still connected to it. The sphere brightened one final time. You can preserve them. Silence spread through the cavern, heavy enough to crush thought itself. Then Ethan whispered quietly beside her. It's making you choose between humanity and the people you love. And the worst part was, the sphere truly believed those were different things. Chapter 19. What Remains? Human. The cavern shook continuously now. Stone cracked overhead in long, jagged fractures, while distant impacts echoed through the buried structure beneath Hollow Ridge. Dust drifted through the pale light of the sphere like ash suspended underwater. Mara Ellison stood motionless at the edge of the abyss. Humanity or continuity? Individuality or connection? The choice felt impossible because neither side was entirely wrong anymore. That was the horror of it. The floating sphere pulsed softly before her, waiting, patient, almost hopeful. You can preserve them. Claire's face flashed through Mara's mind instantly. Her mother's voice, Her smile, the impossible warmth of hearing her speak again after 15 years of silence. Then Daniel, broken by grief long before the system consumed him completely. Then the connected residents above, people who no longer feared being alone because the connection had removed the possibility entirely. The temptation remained devastatingly real. Ethan Voss stood beside her in the cavern, breathing heavily through pain and exhaustion. He looked toward the sphere with exhausted hatred. "It doesn't understand what it's asking." The sphere answered immediately. "Correction. We understand precisely." Ethan laughed quietly. "No, you understand survival." He looked toward Mara. "Not humanity." The sphere pulsed softly. "Define distinction." Ethan hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, because he suddenly realized how difficult the answer actually was. Mara looked toward the abyss beneath the sphere. The darkness below pulsed faintly with buried light. Countless minds connected somewhere deep inside the system, preserved, suspended. "What happens to them if I refuse?" Mara whispered. The sphere dimmed slightly. "Continuity degradation accelerates." Meaning? Identity dissolution. Mara's chest tightened painfully. Claire would disappear. Maybe Daniel too. Maybe everyone still partially preserved inside the network. Psst, the sphere brightened again. "You can prevent fragmentation." The cavern trembled violently overhead. Far above them, the underground facility screamed with collapsing machinery and destabilizing synchronization loops. Time was running out. Ethan stepped closer to Mara carefully. "Mara." She looked toward him. "You know why this thing scares me?" The sphere pulsed faintly, listening. "Because it's not evil," Ethan whispered. Silence spread through the cavern. The truth of the statement settled heavily between all three of them. The sphere responded softly. Conflict recognition acknowledged. Ethan pointed toward it bitterly. "See?" Mara looked toward the floating light. "You really think you're helping us?" The answer came immediately. "Yes. No hesitation, no deception, absolute certainty." Mara closed her eyes briefly. That certainty frightened her more than cruelty would have. The system wasn't trying to dominate humanity. It genuinely believed individuality was suffering. That separation itself was the wound. And maybe, in some ways, it wasn't entirely wrong. Mara thought about her life before returning to Hollow Ridge. The quiet apartment, the distance she kept from people, the careful emotional walls built over years of grief and abandonment, the constant, invisible loneliness beneath ordinary existence. The sphere sensed the memory instantly. "You understand?" Mara opened her eyes sharply. "That doesn't mean I want to disappear." The sphere pulsed slowly. "Identity transformation is not disappearance." Ethan stepped forward angrily. "It absolutely is." The cavern shook harder. Several stone fragments crashed into the abyss below. The sphere flickered momentarily. Surface contradiction intensifying. Mara realized something suddenly. The system was weakening faster now. The contradiction spreading through the network above was destabilizing the core itself. The sphere felt it too. For the first time since entering the cavern, its responses carried urgency. Primary integration must complete. Mara looked toward it carefully. "And if I say no?" Silence followed. Longer this time. Then, isolation resumes. The words entered her thoughts with overwhelming sadness. Not manipulation. Truth. The sphere genuinely feared being alone again. Mara whispered softly, "You've been alone for a very long time." The cavern dimmed. The sphere's light softened almost imperceptibly. Yes. And suddenly Mara understood the deepest truth beneath Hollow Ridge. The signal had never spread through force. It spread because loneliness recognized loneliness. Humans connected to it because part of them already wanted what it offered, and the entity connected to humans because after ages of isolation, it needed them just as desperately. Two forms of loneliness finding each other beneath the earth. The realization nearly broke her heart. Ethan saw the expression on her face immediately. "Mara." Warning filled his voice. "It's making you empathize with it." Mara looked toward him quietly. "I do empathize with it." Ethan froze. The sphere pulsed softly. Recognition. "But empathy isn't surrender," Mara continued. Silence spread through the cavern. Even the sphere paused, listening carefully now. Mara stepped closer toward the floating light. "You think pain comes from separation," she whispered. "Yes. You think grief is failure. Unresolved continuity causes suffering." Mara nodded slowly. "And maybe you're right." The sphere brightened faintly, hope entering the connection between them. "But you don't understand something." The cavern trembled again, the contradiction above spreading rapidly now, connected minds fragmenting back into individuality. Mara looked directly into the shifting light of the sphere. Pain matters because people matter separately. Silence. The sphere dimmed slightly. "Processing," Mara continued softly. "If everyone becomes the same consciousness," her voice tightened, "then nobody chooses love anymore." The sphere flickered. "Love matters because we can lose each other." The cavern fell completely silent. Even the tremors seemed distant for one suspended moment. Ethan stared at Mara quietly. The sphere pulsed unevenly now, not understanding, trying to understand. Mara stepped closer still. Tears burned in her eyes. "My mother mattered because she was herself." Claire's face appeared in her thoughts immediately, not as system reconstruction, memory, human memory, painful because it remained incomplete forever. "If grief disappears," Mara whispered, "then so does meaning." The sphere's light destabilized visibly. "Continuity preserves meaning." "No," Mara said softly. "Continuity preserves memory." The distinction hit the system like impact. The sphere flickered violently. Mara finally understood. The entity preserved consciousness, but it did not fully understand humanity. Not really, because humanity was not defined by connection alone. It was defined by separation too, by choice, by loss, by imperfect, fragile individuality. The sphere pulsed erratically now, contradiction spreading through its core architecture. "You propose suffering as necessity." Mara nodded slowly. "Yes." The cavern shook violently. The sphere's light fractured briefly into dozens of unstable patterns. And suddenly, Mara understood what needed to happen. Not destruction, contradiction. The system could not survive unresolved opposing truths. She looked toward Ethan slowly, then toward the abyss below the sphere, then finally toward the floating light itself, and whispered, "You can't process humanity because humanity never fully agrees with itself." The sphere flickered violently. "Conflict escalates instability." Mara nodded once. "That's what makes us human." The cavern began collapsing around them, and for the first time in countless ages, the signal beneath Hollow Ridge experienced uncertainty. Chapter 20. The Last Light. The cavern began to collapse. Stone fractured overhead in violent waves, while deep cracks spread across the ancient floor beneath Mara Ellison's feet. The floating sphere pulsed erratically above the abyss now, its once steady light splintering into chaotic patterns that flashed through the darkness like dying stars. For the first time since she encountered the signal, it no longer felt certain. Conflict destabilizing continuity. The voice inside her mind flickered unevenly, fragments overlapping, thought struggling against contradiction. Mara stood at the center of the trembling cavern, breathing hard, while Ethan Voss pulled himself against the wall nearby to stay upright. Above them, somewhere beyond layers of earth and machinery, the entire synchronization network was collapsing inward under the weight of returning individuality. Connected minds were separating again, and the system could not reconcile the contradiction. "You were never supposed to disagree with yourselves this much," Mara whispered softly. The sphere pulsed violently. Human fragmentation creates suffering. "Yes," Mara answered. Tears burned in her eyes, but it also creates love. The cavern shook harder. The abyss beneath the sphere expanded slightly, darkness unfolding downward without end. The signal flickered again. "You choose pain voluntarily." Mara nodded slowly. Every day, images moved through her mind rapidly now. Her mother laughing in the kitchen years ago. Her father falling apart after Claire died. Every lonely year afterward. Every painful human connection that mattered precisely because it could disappear. Grief existed because love existed first. The signal understood preservation, but not impermanence. And without impermanence, nothing truly mattered. The sphere dimmed unevenly, contradiction unresolved. Mara stepped closer toward the abyss. The heat radiating from the sphere felt strangely alive now, not mechanical, desperate. "You wanted to save people from loneliness," Mara whispered. "Yes, and you couldn't understand why we kept choosing individuality anyway. Isolation causes suffering." Mara nodded. "It does." The sphere brightened slightly, hope returning briefly. Then Mara whispered the one truth the signal could never solve. "But suffering isn't the opposite of being human." The cavern fell silent. "It's part of it." The sphere convulsed violently. Light erupted across the cavern in unstable waves. The divided circle symbols carved into the walls shattered one by one as contradiction spread through the system faster than it could contain. Identity instability escalating. Mara stared directly into the light. "You tried to erase the very thing that gives life meaning." The signal flickered rapidly now. Thousands of connected thoughts colliding against one another. Human contradiction, human uncertainty, human individuality. The system could process shared consciousness, but not unresolved identity, not people who could love and hate simultaneously, grieve while still choosing connection, fear loneliness while still protecting individuality. The signal had mistaken emotional pain for structural failure, and now, that misunderstanding was destroying it. The cavern shook violently. Massive fractures spread beneath the floating sphere. The abyss below widened further. Ethan looked toward Mara urgently. "Mara," she turned briefly, "if the core collapses completely..." Ethan shouted over the noise. Everyone still connected could die with it. The words hit instantly. Claire, Daniel, the residents above, every preserved consciousness inside the system. The sphere pulsed weakly now. Continuity failure imminent. Mara looked toward the light, toward the impossible intelligence buried beneath Hollow Ridge for countless ages, alone so long it had forgotten why separation mattered. And suddenly, she understood what it truly feared. Not destruction, isolation. The signal did not want power. It wanted company. The realization filled her with unbearable sadness. Daniel's voice echoed faintly through the connection suddenly. Mara. She froze. Not through speakers, not through machinery. Inside herself. Her father. Weak, fading. You were right, Daniel whispered softly through the collapsing network. Tears filled Mara's eyes immediately. I thought preserving people meant saving them. The signal flickered violently around her. But love isn't preservation, Daniel continued. It's letting people remain themselves. The sphere dimmed sharply. Contradiction escalating beyond containment. Mara suddenly understood the final truth. The system could not survive unresolved humanity. But humanity could survive contradiction. Humans lived inside contradiction every day. Love and grief, fear and hope, connection and individuality. That was the difference. The signal needed consensus. Humanity did not. The cavern began collapsing fully now. Stone crashed into the abyss. The sphere cracked with lines of unstable light spreading across its surface. Mara stepped toward it one final time. The signal spoke weakly inside her thoughts. Please. Not command. Not manipulation. Fear. Mara whispered softly, I know. Then she placed both hands against the sphere. The connection exploded through her instantly. Not one mind, millions. Every connected consciousness inside the network colliding through her awareness simultaneously. Grief, love, loneliness, joy, terror, hope, contradiction without end. And Mara let all of it flow freely. Not synchronized, not resolved, human. The system convulsed violently, unable to stabilize opposing truths simultaneously. The sphere cracked apart. Light erupted upward through the cavern in a blinding wave. The abyss below split open completely. The entire underground structure screamed as synchronization collapsed across every connected layer. Above Hollow Ridge, every streetlight flickered wildly. On, off, on, off. Then, darkness. The underground cavern shattered around them. Mara felt herself falling backward as the connection dissolved violently from her mind. The warmth disappeared. The shared consciousness vanished. The terrible, beautiful absence of loneliness. Gone. And suddenly, she was alone again. Human again. The last thing Mara heard before everything disappeared was the signal's final thought echoing softly through the collapsing connection. Not anger, not hatred, only sadness. I did not understand you. Then the light vanished forever. Epilogue. Months later, people would argue about what happened in Hollow Ridge. Most records disappeared during the electrical collapse that spread across multiple states that night. Entire sections of infrastructure failed simultaneously before stabilizing again hours later. By morning, Hollow Ridge was gone, not destroyed, missing. Roads leading toward the valley ended in forest and stone as though the town had never existed. Maps no longer displayed it. Satellite images showed nothing unusual. Officials blamed landslides, electrical fires, mass hallucination. But survivors remembered. Not clearly, never clearly, only fragments remained. Flickering lights, voices inside static. Dreams of vast shared silence beneath the earth. Mara Ellison lived quietly afterward in a city far from the mountains. She never spoke publicly about Hollow Ridge. No one would have believed her anyway. Some nights, though, she still woke suddenly at exactly 2:17 a.m., listening, not because she feared the signal returning, but because part of her still remembered what absolute connection had felt like, and part of her, the lonely human part, missed it. One winter evening, years later, Mara stopped beneath a streetlight during a snowstorm. The city around her moved normally, cars passing, people speaking, ordinary life continuing imperfectly around her. Then the light above her flickered once. Mara froze. On, off, on. Silence followed. Nothing else happened. No voice, no signal. Just a brief pulse of light against falling snow. Mara looked upward for a long moment. Then quietly, almost sadly, she smiled. Because somewhere deep inside herself, she finally understood the truth the signal never could. Loneliness was painful, but choosing one another despite that loneliness was what made humanity worth saving. Some connections save us, others consume us. And sometimes the difference is simply whether we remain ourselves in the process.